Welcome to Crime for Sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Story 1. The sunset cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds of apartment 4B, painting amber stripes across the freshly waxed hardwood floor. Megan Turner stood in the center of what would be her living room, surrounded by stacked cardboard boxes labeled in neat black marker. The air held the familiar scent of new paint mingled with the lingering chemical sweetness of industrial carpet cleaner, a perfect blank slate for a new beginning. She ran her fingertips along the kitchen countertop, smooth and cool beneath her touch. The silence of the space was comforting after the chaos of moving day. Her friends had helped haul furniture up 3 flights of stairs, their voices and laughter now just echoes in her memory. This moment of solitude felt earned, a peaceful introduction to her new home. In the bedroom, Megan methodically unpacked her clothes, hanging blouses and dresses in the closet with careful precision. Her hand brushed against something soft in the far corner of fabric that wasn't hers. She pulled it forward into the light, a man's jacket, navy blue with a small tear on the right elbow. The material was slightly dusty but otherwise well maintained, as if it had been placed there recently, waiting for its owner to return. Strange, she whispered to herself, the word hanging in the air like mist. She checked the pockets, empty. No identification, no clues, just an abandoned piece of clothing that someone had forgotten or left behind deliberately. She placed it on her bed, making a mental note to ask the building manager about it in the morning. The bathroom was her next project. Megan lined up her toiletries along the edge of the sink, creating a small display of familiar objects in this unfamiliar space. As she reached behind the mirror to place her medication on the cabinet shelf, her fingers discovered something hard and plastic wedged in the back corner. A toothbrush, blue and white, its bristles still relatively new. It wasn't packaged, it had been used. A slight chill passed through her despite the warmth of the late summer evening. One forgotten item could be explained away easily, but 2 suggested something else entirely. She took out her phone and scrolled to find the landlord's number, hesitating before pressing the call button. The phone rang 3 times before Mr. Peterson answered, his voice gruff with the lateness of the hour. Mr. Peterson, it's Megan Turner from 4B. I just moved in today and... Megan from 4B. His voice carried a note of confusion that made her pause. Yes, I signed the lease last week. You gave me the keys yesterday, she clarified, a subtle uneasiness beginning to form in the pit of her stomach. There was a prolonged silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of papers rustling. When the landlord spoke again, his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. That unit was never vacant, he said slowly. The last tenant never moved out. Megan froze, her eyes darting to the open bedroom door where the navy jacket lay on her comforter. What do you mean? I'm standing in the apartment right now. It was empty when I arrived, except she stopped herself, suddenly not wanting to mention the discovered items. Except what? Mr. Peterson pressed. Nothing, she replied too quickly. There must be some confusion with your records. Maybe you're thinking of a different unit. Detective Sarah Holloway reviewed the case file for the 3rd time, the pages illuminated by her desk lamp's soft glow. The precinct was quiet at this hour, with only the occasional squeak of a chair or distant ringing phone to break the stillness. 3 months had passed since Megan Turner's disturbing phone call to her landlord, and the investigation had yielded more questions than answers. According to the building's records, apartment 4B had been leased to Daniel Mercer for the past 2 years. Rent was paid automatically from his bank account each month without fail. His employer, a software company downtown, reported that Daniel had requested to work remotely about 6 months ago, citing personal reasons. His emails continued regularly until approximately 1 week before Megan moved in. No one had reported Daniel missing. He had no family in the area, and his friends assumed he was simply busy with work. His digital footprint showed normal activity, streaming services used, food deliveries ordered, even social media posts, all continuing as if nothing had changed. But Daniel himself was nowhere to be found. Holloway sipped her cooling coffee, studying the crime scene photographs. The apartment had been remarkably clean when they searched it, partly due to Megan's recent move-in, but also suggesting a thorough cleaning before her arrival. Luminol tests revealed faint traces of blood in the bathroom drain, too degraded for conclusive DNA testing. The detective's attention returned to the photograph of the navy jacket, now sealed in an evidence bag. Inside the lining, forensics had found a hidden pocket containing a small USB drive. The data was encrypted, and their tech team was still working to access its contents. Megan Turner had moved out immediately after the police investigation began, returning to her parents' home in another state. In her statement, she described feeling watched during her brief stay in the apartment, hearing subtle movements behind the walls late at night. It was as if someone was holding their breath, waiting for me to discover something, she had written. The building manager, when questioned, revealed a troubling detail. He had never met Daniel Mercer in person. The entire rental process had been conducted online, with the security deposit and first month's rent paid through an electronic transfer. The keys had been mailed to an address that, when investigated, turned out to be an abandoned post office box. Holloway turned to the apartment's floor plan, noting the measurements with careful attention. Something about the proportions had bothered her from the beginning. The exterior dimensions of the building suggested apartment 4B should be slightly larger than it appeared inside. The discrepancy was small, perhaps only a few feet, but enough to raise questions. She authorized a second search of the apartment, this time focusing on the structural elements. Behind the refrigerator, they discovered it, a narrow door painted to match the wall with no handle. When forced open, it revealed a cramped space no larger than a walk-in closet, containing a folding chair, a small table, and a laptop connected to an elaborate system of miniature cameras hidden throughout the apartment. The laptop was still running, its battery maintained by a power cord snaking through a hole drilled in the wall. On the screen was a paused video feed of Megan Turner unpacking her belongings on moving day. The investigation took another turn when they identified the previous tenants of apartment 4B. There had been 7 in the past 5 years, each staying approximately 6 to 8 months before suddenly breaking their lease and moving out. Most cited personal reasons, job relocations, or family emergencies. None had filed complaints about strange occurrences in the apartment. He watched them, Holloway explained to her partner as they reviewed the evidence. He created a false identity, rented the apartment legally, then built that hidden room and pretended to move out. The building manager never actually saw any of the tenants move in or out. He just received the paperwork and payments electronically. The digital forensics team finally cracked the encryption on the USB drive. It contained folders labeled with the names of previous tenants, each holding thousands of images and video clips documenting intimate moments of their daily lives. The most recent folder was labeled Megan, nearly empty compared to the others, her tenancy cut short by her discovery. 6 weeks later, a security camera at a bus terminal in Seattle captured footage of a man who matched Daniel Mercer's description. He carried a single backpack and purchased a ticket to Vancouver with cash. By the time authorities identified him in the footage, he had crossed the border. The case remained technically open, but leads had grown cold. Apartment 4B stayed vacant, its reputation now tarnished by the unsettling story that had spread throughout the building, despite official attempts to keep details private. Detective Holloway occasionally drove past the building on her way home, glancing up at the windows of 4B sometimes, late at night. She thought she could see a faint blue glow behind the blinds, as if from a computer screen. But when she blinked, the window would be dark again, leaving her to wonder if her mind was playing tricks or if someone had returned, creating a new identity, waiting patiently for the next tenant to arrive. In the evidence room of the precinct, the navy jacket with the torn elbow hung in its sealed bag, a silent reminder that some people move out without ever really leaving. Story 2, the mortician had seen strange things before, but this was different. A small wooden box had been left in the preparation room with no label, no paperwork. Inside, folded neatly, was a wedding dress, a set of car keys, and an old, yellowed envelope. The note inside had just 3 words, "Find me first." Howard Green had worked at Pinewood Funeral Home for nearly 3 decades. The small town of Millfield rarely offered surprises, especially in his line of work. Death had a certain predictability to it, but as he stood in the dim light of the preparation room, the wooden box resting on the stainless steel table before him, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years' uncertainty. The funeral home was quiet that evening. Rain tapped gently against the high windows, casting shimmering shadows across the polished floors. Howard's fingers traced the edge of the box handcrafted oak with no markings, no signatures, just the 3 items inside and that cryptic note. He called Detective Sarah Linden the next morning. The police station was just 2 blocks away from the funeral home, and Sarah had known Howard since she was a child. Her father had been buried by Howard's hands 15 years ago. "I've never seen anything like it," Howard explained, his voice barely above a whisper as they stood in the preparation room. The box sat between them, now closed. "It was just here. When I locked up Wednesday night, nothing. When I came in Thursday morning, this." Detective Linden nodded, her notepad untouched. The wedding dress was yellowed with age, but had been preserved with care. The car keys were to a Cadillac 1980s model by the look of them, and the note, written in faded blue ink on thick paper, those 3 words seemed to fill the room: "Find me first." "The security cameras?" she asked. "None inside, just at the entrance, but they showed nothing unusual." The rain continued for 3 days as Detective Linden began her investigation. The funeral home's visitor log showed only the usual family members coming to arrange services, a delivery of flowers, the regular cleaning staff, nothing out of place, nothing unusual. The wedding dress had no tags, no labels, custom-made perhaps. The car keys belonged to a 1986 Cadillac DeVille, but without a registration or VIN number, they were just keys. The handwriting on the note was elegant, but offered no immediate clues. On the 4th day, as autumn leaves drifted past her office window, Detective Linden received a call from the county records office. A search of marriage licenses from the area had turned up something interesting: a photograph from 1986 showing a bride in what appeared to be the exact same wedding dress. The bride's name was Alina Blackwood. She had married Thomas Blackwood on October 15, 1986. And according to public records, Alina Blackwood had gone missing just 3 months after her wedding. The case had gone cold decades ago. Thomas Blackwood still lived in Millfield, in the same house he had shared with Alina. Now in his 70s, he was a retired accountant who kept to himself. No criminal record, no suspicion had ever formally attached to him regarding Alina's disappearance. The detective's car rolled slowly up the gravel driveway of the Blackwood residence. The house was well-maintained white paint, blue shutters, a garden that showed careful attention. Thomas Blackwood answered the door on the third knock. His eyes, pale blue behind thick glasses, showed no surprise at the sight of the detective's badge. "I've been waiting for someone to come," he said, his voice steady. "Please come in." Inside, the home was like a museum to the 1980s furniture untouched by time, photographs on every surface. Alina's face smiled from dozens of frames. Her presence filled every corner of the house. "The box," Detective Linden began, once they were seated in the living room. The air smelled of coffee and old books. "Yes," Thomas nodded, "the box is from Alina." The detective's pen hovered above her notepad. "Mr. Blackwood, Alina has been missing for almost 40 years. Thomas Blackwood's hands rested calmly on his knees. "Not missing, detective. That's never been quite right. She wasn't missing. She was hiding." He told the story slowly, each word measured and precise. Alina had been ill, a rare form of early-onset dementia that had begun to manifest just weeks after their wedding. The diagnosis had been devastating. The prognosis worse. 6 months, perhaps a year before she would no longer recognize him. "She made me promise something," Thomas explained, his gaze fixed on a photograph of Alina on their wedding day. "She made me promise that when the time came, when she no longer knew who I was, I would help her disappear." Alina hadn't wanted him to watch her decline, hadn't wanted to become a stranger in their home. And so, when the moment came a morning when she had looked at him with confusion and asked who he was, Thomas had kept his promise. "We had it all arranged, a small cottage by Lake Mercer, a caretaker who understood, no questions asked, no records kept." For 38 years, Thomas had visited Alina every Sunday. He brought her fresh flowers, read to her, held her hand. She never recognized him again, but she smiled at his visits. The caretaker, a registered nurse named Margaret, had kept Alina comfortable and safe all those years. "Last month, Alina passed away in her sleep," Thomas said, his voice finally breaking. "Peaceful. Margaret called me immediately. We had an agreement, you see. No hospitals, no records, just dignity." The detective sat in silence, trying to absorb the story. "The box was Alina's idea," Thomas continued after a moment. "She prepared it before she lost herself, said that when the time came it should be delivered to the funeral home with that note. 'Find me first,' she always said, 'before the disease does.' In the end, there was no crime to solve, only a promise kept for nearly 4 decades. Alina Blackwood had chosen her own disappearance rather than let illness steal her identity piece by piece. Thomas had chosen love over law. Detective Linden closed her notepad. There would be paperwork, of course, questions from the department. But as she looked at Thomas Blackwood, at the weight finally lifted from his shoulders after decades of solitary knowledge, she understood that sometimes justice and law occupied different territories. The wooden box remained at the funeral home. Howard Green arranged a quiet service for Alina Blackwood. Thomas brought photographs not just from their wedding day, but from all the years after. Alina in her cottage by the lake, Alina in the garden, Alina smiling at a visitor she didn't recognize but welcomed nonetheless. The small town of Millfield added another story to its quiet history. And in the preparation room of Pinewood Funeral Home, Howard Green kept a small wooden box on a shelf, empty now, but full of reminders that love sometimes writes its own rules. Story 3. The silver-framed mirror hung on Margaret Coleman's hallway wall for 37 years, witnessing the quiet rhythms of a small-town family's life. That evening, as rain tapped against the windows of her cottage in Millfield, Margaret paused before it, absently adjusting a strand of gray hair that had fallen across her forehead. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of water against glass. Outside, darkness had settled over the town, wrapping it in a blanket of shadows and streetlights. In the reflection, Margaret could see the worn edges of the photo frame on the table behind her Eliza's high school portrait, taken just 3 weeks before she disappeared. 5 years had passed since then. 5 years of unanswered questions hanging in the air like dust motes, visible only when caught in rare moments of light. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple slightly, though perhaps it was just a trick of the evening light or the effect of fatigue on Margaret's eyes. She had been sorting through old boxes in the attic all afternoon, a task she had postponed for far too long. Each item she touched felt like a small universe of memories, some pleasant, others painfully sharp. And then she saw it. Behind her reflection, partially obscured by shadow, stood Eliza. The scream that tore from Margaret's throat seemed to belong to someone else entirely primal and raw. She spun around, heart hammering against her ribs, but found only the empty hallway, the familiar wallpaper, the closed door to the kitchen. When she turned back to the mirror, the image was gone. Just Margaret alone, her face drained of color, her hands trembling. Detective Nathan Reeves received the call at 9:17 p.m. He had been with the Millfield Police Department for 22 years and had personally led the investigation into Eliza Coleman's disappearance. The case file, a thick manila folder with dog-eared corners, had never been fully closed, but it had grown cold, gathering dust in a filing cabinet labeled unresolved. "She was there, Detective. I saw her," Margaret insisted, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she sat at her kitchen table. A cup of tea had grown cold in front of her, untouched. "I know how it sounds. I know what you're thinking." Reeves took a slow sip from his own mug, his weathered notebook open before him. His pen made a soft scratching sound against the paper as he wrote. He wasn't thinking anything, not yet. After 2 decades of police work, he had learned to listen before forming judgments. "Tell me exactly what you saw, Mrs. Coleman," he said, his voice carrying the gentle weight of a man who had conducted hundreds of interviews like this one. The investigation into what came to be known as the Mirror Incident began quietly. Reeves assigned Officer Lisa Mendez to review the original case files while he examined the mirror itself. There was nothing remarkable about it, a standard piece of home decor purchased from a department store that had closed years ago. Digital forensics analyst Kevin Park took photographs of the mirror from various angles under different lighting conditions. "Sometimes our eyes play tricks on us," he explained to Reeves as they stood in Margaret's hallway, "especially in low light, especially when grief is involved." But Margaret remained adamant. It was her. She was trying to tell me something. On the third night after Margaret's report, Reeves decided to stay at the Coleman house, setting up a small surveillance camera aimed at the mirror. Margaret had gone to stay with her sister in the next town over, unable to sleep in the house after what she'd seen. The house creaked and settled around him as Reeves sat in a chair beside the thermostat, its faint green glow providing the only illumination in the hallway. Past midnight, the digital recorder captured a subtle drop in temperature 7 degrees in less than a minute. Frame-by-frame analysis of the footage later showed nothing unusual in the mirror's reflection, but sound technician Sarah Williams noted an anomaly. When the audio was isolated and enhanced beneath the ambient house noises, there was what sounded like a whisper below. The investigation shifted to the basement of the Coleman home, a space that had been thoroughly searched during the initial missing person case. A team of officers removed boxes of Christmas decorations, old sporting equipment, and stacked newspapers, revealing the concrete floor beneath. "This section sounds different," Officer Mendez noted, tapping her foot along the eastern wall. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed an inconsistency in the foundation, a space that shouldn't exist. What they found behind the false wall wasn't Eliza Coleman. It was a small chamber containing a metal lockbox, rusted at the edges but intact. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and a journal belonging to Margaret's late husband, Arthur Coleman. The contents revealed a history no one in Millfield had suspected. Before moving to town, Arthur had been involved in a series of embezzlement schemes in 3 different states. The journal detailed how he had changed their identities, moving the family whenever suspicions arose. Eliza's disappearance hadn't been a kidnapping or a runaway situation. She had discovered her father's secrets and threatened to expose him. "He couldn't have," Margaret whispered when Reeves showed her the evidence, her hands shaking as she turned the pages of the journal. "I would have known." But the final entry in Arthur Coleman's journal, dated 1 day after Eliza was reported missing, told a different story. "It's done. She's gone. Margaret must never know." Arthur Coleman had died of a heart attack 3 years after his daughter's disappearance, taking the location of Eliza's body to his grave. The investigation expanded to properties the family had owned or rented throughout the years, but no trace of Eliza was found. The mirror, however, remained an unexplained element. No evidence of tampering or projection technology was discovered. When asked about the whispered word below in the recording, Margaret had a simple explanation. "That wasn't Eliza telling us where to look. That was Eliza telling us my husband had dragged her soul down with his secrets." The case of Eliza Coleman remains officially unsolved. The town of Millfield added her name to a memorial bench in the Central Park, and Margaret eventually sold the house, unable to live with its whispers and reflections. Detective Reeves still drives past the old Coleman place occasionally, slowing his car as he watches the new family moving about behind curtained windows. Sometimes, when the angle is just right, he catches a glimpse of the hallway mirror through the front window still hanging in the same spot, reflecting the life of a new family, unaware of what it once witnessed. And sometimes, though he would never admit it to his colleagues, he wonders if what Margaret saw wasn't a ghost at all, but something equally haunting, the reflection of a truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Story 4. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the Harrison family home, casting long, gentle shadows across the worn hardwood floors. It was the kind of light that revealed dust particles dancing in the air, quiet, unassuming, ordinary. The house on Maple Street had stood for nearly 7 decades, its creaks and groans as familiar to the Harrisons as their own heartbeats. Thomas and Alina had purchased it 12 years ago, raising their son Noah within its sturdy walls, memorizing every uneven floorboard, every stubborn window that needed extra coaxing in winter. Detective Sarah Lawson stood in that same hallway now, notebook open, pen hovering above an empty page. The house was silent except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room and the occasional creak as the old house settled. She glanced down at the preliminary report in her hand, reading the words again, though they hadn't changed since the first time she'd reviewed them at the station. "And you're certain," she asked, her voice deliberately measured, "that this door wasn't here before yesterday?" Thomas Harrison nodded slowly, his fingers absently running through his graying hair. His eyes never left the door in question, a simple white wooden door with a tarnished brass handle, positioned between the bathroom and Noah's bedroom. "We've lived here for 12 years, Detective," Alina said, her arms wrapped tightly around herself despite the warmth of the June morning. "I've vacuumed this hallway hundreds of times. I've hung Christmas decorations, helped Noah with science projects right here. That door," her voice faltered slightly, "that door simply wasn't there." Sarah approached the door carefully, noting how the paint matched perfectly with the surrounding wall. No fresh smell of paint, no visible seams or signs of recent construction. The handle, however, was different, old, scratched, with peculiar marks that seemed to indicate someone had been clawing at it from the inside. "And it was Noah who noticed it first?" Sarah asked, jotting down notes in her small, neat handwriting. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was running down the hall for breakfast when he just stopped. He pointed and said, 'That door wasn't there before.' We thought he was playing some kind of game." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fear. Sarah could feel it pressing against her chest, the way the unexplainable often did. 23 years on the force, and there were still cases that defied logic, that made her question what she knew to be true. "Have you opened it?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the report. Alina shook her head quickly. "We didn't dare. We called you immediately." Sarah nodded, appreciating their caution. She moved closer to the door, examining the frame without touching it. The wood appeared aged, consistent with the rest of the house. No signs of forced entry, no indication that the wall had been recently disturbed. It was as if the door had always been there, contradicting the family's collective memory. "Where's Noah now?" Sarah asked, turning back to the parents. "With my sister," Alina replied. "We didn't want him here until we understand what's happening." Sarah nodded again, then spoke into her radio, requesting forensics. Within 20 minutes, the quiet house transformed into a careful but deliberate hive of activity. Technicians in gloves measured and photographed the door from every angle. Dust samples were collected. The handle was swabbed for fingerprints. Sarah watched as Officer Martinez ran a handheld scanner across the wall surrounding the door. "Structure analysis shows no recent modifications to the wall," Martinez reported, his brow furrowed in confusion. "According to this, the door frame is integrated with the original building materials, same age as the house itself." Sarah processed this information slowly, allowing it to settle in her mind without rushing to conclusions. The house had been built in 1957. The Harrisons had purchased it in 2012, and yet somehow, A door that had apparently existed since construction had remained unnoticed by them for 12 years. As the afternoon progressed, neighbors were interviewed. None recalled seeing construction vehicles or workers at the Harrison home. Property records were examined, revealing no unexplained renovations. The original blueprints of the house, located in dusty county archives, added another layer to the mystery. They showed no door at that location. "We're ready to open it," the forensics light announced late in the day, after exhausting all external examination options. Sarah nodded, and the Harrisons, who had been sitting quietly in the living room, rose to their feet. "You might want to stay back," she suggested gently. "No," Thomas said firmly. "It's our house. We need to see." With cameras recording and officers positioned strategically in the hallway, the forensics technician carefully turned the handle. It rotated smoothly, without resistance. The door opened inward with a slight creak that seemed to echo through the suddenly still house. Behind the door was a small room, perhaps 8 feet square. The walls were bare plaster, yellowed with age. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit. There was no furniture, no windows, just dust-covered floorboards, and in the center of the room, a small object that caught the beam of the technician's flashlight. Sarah stepped forward carefully, instructing everyone else to remain in the doorway. She approached the object, crouching down beside it. A child's toy, a wooden train car, hand-painted in faded red and blue. It looked decades old. "That," Elinor's voice broke the silence, trembling. "That looks exactly like the toy Noah said his friend in the wall gave him last month." Sarah looked up sharply. "What friend?" Thomas swallowed hard. "We thought it was just an imaginary friend. Noah started talking about someone who lived in the walls about 6 weeks ago. We assumed it was normal kid stuff. Then he showed up with that toy one morning, said his friend gave it to him." Sarah felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. She carefully photographed the toy without touching it, then continued her examination of the room. In the far corner, barely visible in the dim light, were scratch marks on the wall. Long, desperate-looking grooves, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. The investigation continued for weeks. The toy was determined to be manufactured circa 1960, consistent with the age of the house. Ground-penetrating radar revealed no anomalies beneath the room. Previous occupants of the home were tracked down and interviewed. An elderly woman who had lived there in the 1970s became visibly shaken when shown photos of the room. "We heard sounds," she whispered, her hands trembling around her teacup. "Scratching in the walls. My husband said it was mice, but it wasn't mice. Sometimes I thought I heard humming. A child's song over and over." County records revealed a disturbing detail. In 1962, a 4-year-old boy had gone missing from the neighborhood. He was never found. His favorite toy, according to newspaper archives, had been a wooden train set. The case remains officially open. The Harrisons no longer live in the house on Maple Street. The door, despite multiple attempts to seal it, continues to appear unlocked each morning, though no one has seen it open on its own. Noah, now staying permanently with his aunt, still speaks occasionally of his friend in the wall, a little boy who wants to come out and play. Detective Lawson keeps the case file on her desk, returning to it between other investigations. Sometimes, late at night in the quiet of the station, she finds herself staring at the photographs of those scratch marks on the wall, wondering about the desperation that would drive someone or something to claw so desperately at solid plaster. And she wonders, though she would never admit it aloud, about doors that appear overnight in places where no doors should be, and what might be waiting patiently on the other side. Story 5, she had always felt like someone was watching her, but the police found no evidence. Then one morning, she checked her mailbox. Inside was a notebook filled with handwritten pages. Every entry described her daily routine in detail. The last sentence made her blood run cold. You left your bedroom window unlocked last night. The small town of Millfield had always prided itself on its safety. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, where front doors remained unlocked during daylight hours, and where Detective Sarah Collins had spent 15 relatively uneventful years on the force. But on this particular Monday morning in October, as fog settled between the Victorian houses that lined Maple Street, Sarah found herself standing in Eliza Bennett's living room, holding a leather-bound journal that changed everything. The room was quiet except for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. Eliza sat on her floral sofa, hands trembling slightly as she cradled a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her face, usually bright and animated according to those who knew her, appeared drawn and pale in the soft morning light filtering through lace curtains. I first noticed something was off about 3 months ago, Eliza explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Little things, a garden chair moved slightly. The gate left open when I was certain I'd closed it. My mail seemed disturbed somehow. Detective Collins nodded, the weight of the journal heavy in her latex-gloved hands. The handwriting inside was meticulous, almost artistic in its precision. Each entry was dated, beginning nearly 4 months prior. The stalker had documented Eliza's morning routines, her weekly trips to the supermarket, conversations she'd had with neighbors while watering her prized roses. There were details about phone calls Eliza had received, what she wore to her job at the local library, and which lights she turned off last before going to bed. When I reported it, Eliza continued, staring at a point somewhere beyond the detective. Everyone thought I was being paranoid. Even my sister suggested I might need to talk to someone. Professional help, she meant. A humorless smile flickered across her lips. I began to believe them until this. Sarah gently placed the journal into an evidence bag, the soft rustle of plastic breaking the room's stillness. Outside, technicians were dusting the mailbox for fingerprints, but Sarah harbored few illusions about finding any. Whoever had done this had been careful, methodical, patient. The investigation proceeded with the quiet persistence that characterized small-town police work. Sarah interviewed neighbors who had noticed nothing unusual. She reviewed the limited security camera footage from nearby businesses. She examined Eliza's phone records for suspicious calls. Days stretched into weeks. Meanwhile, Eliza's life constricted like a slowly tightening knot. She installed new locks, security cameras, motion sensor lights. She stopped walking to work, instead asking colleagues for rides. She drew her curtains day and night. Sleep became elusive, her nights punctuated by the sound of branches scratching against windows, by creaking floorboards, by the distant howl of autumn wind that sometimes sounded almost like breathing. The only lead came from Millfield Library's head librarian, Margaret Winters, who mentioned a new patron who had started visiting around the time. The journal entries began a quiet, unremarkable man who often sat at a table with a clear view of Eliza's desk. I never caught his name, Margaret said, her brow furrowed as she tried to recall details. Middle-aged, I think, brown hair maybe graying at the temples. He'd spend hours with newspapers or local history books. I remember thinking it was nice to see someone so interested in our archives. The description matched dozens of men in Millfield. Without security cameras in the library, there was no way to identify him further. In late November, as the first snow dusted Millfield streets, a second journal appeared not in Eliza's mailbox, but on her kitchen table. The implications were clear and chilling. The stalker had been inside her home. This journal contained more intimate details, notes about conversations Eliza had behind closed doors, observations about personal items in her bedroom, a pressed flower from her nightstand. The final page contained a Polaroid photograph of Eliza sleeping. Sarah ordered a patrol car to drive by Eliza's house every hour. She installed temporary cameras herself, off the record, using department equipment. She advised Eliza to stay with family, but Eliza refused. "This is my home," she had said, her voice finding strength for the first time since the ordeal began. "I won't be chased out of it." 3 nights later at 2:17 a.m., one of the cameras detected movement in Eliza's backyard. The officer on patrol responded within minutes. The garden gate stood open. A basement window had been disturbed, but the house was empty. Eliza was gone. For 48 hours, the small Millfield police force conducted their most intensive search in decades. They combed the woods behind Eliza's property. They dragged the small lake at the town's edge. They interviewed every person who had any connection to Eliza, no matter how tenuous. On the 3rd day, as weak winter sunlight struggled to penetrate the cloud cover, Sarah's phone rang. It was Eliza. "I'm safe," she said simply. "I'm at my sister's in Boston. I've been here since Tuesday night." Relief flooded through Sarah, followed quickly by confusion. But the break-in. "I knew someone would come eventually," Eliza explained. "After the second journal, I started keeping a packed bag ready. When I heard something that night, I slipped out the front door while they were trying to get in the back. I called a taxi to the bus station." A pause. "I left something for you at my house, on my desk." Sarah drove to Eliza's house immediately. On the antique writing desk in the corner of the living room sat a 3rd journal identical to the previous 2, but the handwriting inside was different. It was Eliza's. The journal contained every detail Eliza had noticed over the months, every suspicion, every moment of fear. And something more, her own careful observations of those around her, including detailed notes about Dennis Whitaker, the quiet assistant who had started working at Millfield Library 6 months ago, who always seemed to linger near her desk, who had mentioned knowing which bus she took home, who had once commented on how much he liked her bedroom curtains, though he'd never been to her home. When police searched Dennis Whitaker's apartment, they found hundreds of photographs of Eliza, a duplicate key to her house, and an elaborate shrine with items taken from her home: hairbrushes, earrings, a pillowcase. They also found draft versions of the journals he had left for her, each one meticulously revised to maximize her fear. Dennis Whitaker was arrested without incident. He offered no resistance, no explanation. The only thing he said during his arrest was, "She noticed me. Finally, she really noticed me." Eliza never returned to Millfield. The Victorian house on Maple Street remained empty for years, its "for sale" sign weathering in the garden until it eventually fell. Detective Sarah Collins kept Eliza's journal in her desk drawer. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the police station was empty, she would open it and read the careful observations of a woman who, when made to feel hunted, had become the hunter instead. In her final entry, Eliza had written, "The most terrifying thing isn't that someone has been watching me. It's that I've stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like prey. So I've made a decision I'm going to start watching back." Story 6. The amber light of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Detective James Morgan's office, illuminating the scattered photographs like islands in a dark sea. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time in the otherwise silent room. Outside, a gentle November rain tapped against the windows, creating a soothing rhythm that belied the unsettling nature of the case before him. Morgan ran his fingers along the edge of a manila folder, worn smooth from handling. Inside were the details of what the department had initially classified as a routine break-in at the residence of Alina Whitfield, a 68-year-old retired librarian living in the quiet suburb of Maplewood. But as he reviewed the case for the third time that evening, he knew there was nothing routine about it. "The doll that didn't stay put," he murmured to himself, reading the informal title he'd scribbled at the top of his notes. Alina Whitfield lived alone in a modest two-story Victorian home that had been in her family for generations. Her neighbors described her as a private but pleasant woman who maintained her garden with meticulous care and occasionally volunteered at the local historical society. She had no children, no pets, and seemingly no enemies. 3 weeks ago, Alina had visited Tarkington's Antiques and Curiosities, a shop that had operated on Main Street for over 40 years. According to the owner, Harold Tarkington, she had purchased a porcelain doll dating back to the early 1900s. The doll had pale skin, rosy cheeks, and wore a blue velvet dress with delicate lace trim. Its eyes were made of painted glass, a deep shade of blue that seemed almost too lifelike. Just an ordinary collectible, Tarkington had insisted during his interview. Valuable, yes, but nothing unusual about it. I've sold dozens like it over the years. Morgan lifted a photograph from the folder, a police image of the doll sitting on Alina's antique rocking chair. Its painted smile seemed to hold secrets, though Morgan reminded himself not to project his own unease onto an inanimate object. Alina's first call to the police came exactly 1 week after her purchase. Her voice on the recorded line was steady but tinged with confusion as she explained that she had placed the doll on a shelf in her study before going to bed, only to find it sitting at her kitchen table the next morning. "I know how this sounds," she had said to the dispatcher, "but I live alone and my doors were locked. I'm not reporting a break-in because nothing was taken. I just don't understand how it moved." The responding officer had found no signs of forced entry. The incident was filed as a non-event, possibly the result of forgetfulness or confusion on Alina's part. 3 days later, she called again. This time, her voice carried a slight tremor. "I've locked it in my china cabinet," she explained. "I used the key. I'm the only one who has the key. But when I woke up this morning, the cabinet was still locked and the doll was sitting on my nightstand." Morgan picked up another photograph, the china cabinet in question. Solid oak with a brass lock that showed no signs of tampering. The key had been found in Alina's nightgown pocket, just where she claimed to have put it. The responding officer had suggested installing a home security camera. Alina agreed, and a simple system was set up that same day, one camera in her bedroom and another in her living room where the china cabinet stood. Morgan pressed play on his laptop, watching the footage for what must have been the dozenth time. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., The living room was dark except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. The china cabinet stood against the wall, its glass front reflecting the dim light. Inside, the doll was clearly visible on the middle shelf. At 2:17 a.m., the footage became grainy, distorted by what the tech department had identified as electromagnetic interference. When the image cleared at 2:19 a.m., the cabinet appeared unchanged, still locked, still undisturbed, but the doll was no longer inside. Switching to the bedroom camera, Morgan watched as Alina slept peacefully, unaware of the subtle shift in the shadows near her nightstand. The footage distorted again, and when it cleared, the doll was there, sitting upright, its glass eyes seeming to stare directly at the sleeping woman. No signs of break-in, no other people visible on any footage, no explanation for how a locked object could move from one locked location to another. Alina's third call came after she had spent the night at her sister's house, leaving the doll locked in her home safe, a small but sturdy model bolted to the floor of her closet. She returned the next morning to find the safe still locked, the combination unchanged, and the doll sitting in her rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth as if recently disturbed. That was when Morgan had been assigned to the case. He had interviewed Alina, examined the doll, checked for hidden mechanisms, strings, anything that might explain the movement. He found nothing. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" he had asked her during their second meeting. The question hung in the air between them as Alina considered her response. "The temperature," she finally said. "It gets colder in whatever room the doll appears in, and sometimes I think I hear, humming, a child's melody, but it stops when I fully wake up." Morgan closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, listening to the rain. The case had stalled. No evidence of criminal activity, no rational explanation for the doll's movement. Just the increasingly disturbed testimony of an elderly woman and footage that raised more questions than it answered. He had suggested Alina get rid of the doll. She had tried 3 times. Once she had driven it to a donation center 2 towns over. Once she had given it to her sister to keep. And once, in desperation, she had buried it in her garden during a heavy rainstorm. Each time, by morning, the doll had returned to her house. Yesterday, Alina Whitfield had disappeared. Her bed was found neatly made, her house locked from the inside, her car still in the garage. The only thing out of place was the doll sitting in Alina's favorite armchair by the window, its porcelain hand resting on an open book. The book was a history of Maplewood, turned to a page about the original owners of Alina's house. In the sepia-toned photograph, a family of 4 stood stiffly in front of the newly built Victorian. The mother, the father, a young boy, and a small girl holding a porcelain doll that looked eerily familiar. According to the caption, the little girl had disappeared in 1912. She was never found. Morgan gathered his notes and stood up, his decision made. Tomorrow he would drive to Tarkington's Antiques and demand more information about the doll's provenance. He would speak again with Alina's sister about family history. He would search the house again, more thoroughly this time. As he switched off his desk lamp, his phone buzzed with a text message from Officer Daniels, who was stationed at Alina's house for the night. "The doll is gone, just disappeared from the evidence bag, and sir, I swear I heard humming." Morgan stared at the message as a chill settled over him. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away footprints that might have led to answers, to Alina, to the truth behind the doll that didn't stay put. Story 7. At first, the plumber thought it was just a clogged pipe, but as he worked, he heard whispers coming from the drain. He assumed it was an echo until a voice called his name. Raymond Mercer had been fixing drains in the small town of Oakwood for nearly 30 years. His weathered hands knew every type of pipe, every kind of blockage that the old houses in this forgotten corner of New England could produce. The November morning was unusually cold when he received the call from 317 Maple Street, a Victorian home that had stood empty for months before the new owners moved in. The floorboards creaked beneath Raymond's boots as he followed Mrs. Livingston through the narrow hallway. The house smelled of fresh paint and old wood, an incongruous mixture that spoke of renovation attempts layered over decades of history. She led him to the bathroom on the second floor, where the sink had been draining slowly since they moved in 3 weeks ago. "Sometimes there's this sound," Mrs. Livingston said, her voice barely above a whisper, "like water running when no one's using it." She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her eyes not quite meeting Raymond's. "My husband thinks I'm imagining things." Raymond nodded, setting his worn leather tool bag on the white tile floor. The bathroom was immaculate, newly renovated, with gleaming fixtures that seemed at odds with the rest of the aging house. He knelt beside the sink, the joints in his knees protesting slightly as he adjusted his position to examine the pipes underneath. "I'll take a look," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the small space. "Old houses like this, pipes can make all sorts of noises." Mrs. Livingston lingered in the doorway for a moment before quietly excusing herself. Raymond heard her footsteps fade down the hallway as he began to work, the familiar routine of loosening the trap beneath the sink calming him, as it always did. The pipe was indeed clogged. Hair and soap residue had formed a dense mass that water could barely penetrate. Nothing unusual for a house this age. As Raymond worked to clear the blockage, the silence of the empty house settled around him, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the soft scraping of his tools. That's when he first heard it, a faint sound like rushing water, but somehow different, not the gurgle of pipes or the hiss of air. It was almost like whispering. Raymond paused, his hands going still as he listened. The sound faded, then returned, slightly louder. Words, he thought, though he couldn't make them out. "Probably just the water pipes in the walls," he murmured to himself, returning to his work. Old houses were full of strange acoustic sounds traveling through vents or pipes from other rooms, playing tricks on the ears. But as he removed the final obstruction from the trap, the whispering grew more distinct. Raymond leaned closer to the drain, curiosity overcoming his usual pragmatism. The pipe was clear now, yet the sound persisted, rising from deep within the house's plumbing system. "Hello," he called softly, feeling slightly foolish. The whispering stopped abruptly. Raymond exhaled, shaking his head at his own imagination. He began reassembling the pipe, tightening the connectors with practiced efficiency. "Raymond." His name drifted up from the drain, as clear as if someone had spoken directly into his ear. Raymond froze, the wrench suspended in his weathered hand. The voice had been soft, almost gentle, neither male nor female, yet distinctly human. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chill that ran down his spine. Silence answered him. Raymond quickly finished tightening the pipe and stood up, his knees cracking in protest. He turned on the tap, watching water spiral down the now unobstructed drain. The sink emptied perfectly, no gurgling, no resistance, just clean, functional plumbing. He was packing his tools when Mrs. Livingston returned, her steps hesitant on the hardwood floor. "All fixed?" she asked, her thin arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the house. Raymond nodded, closing his tool bag. "Just hair and soap, common problem." He hesitated, then added, "Do you hear those sounds often, the ones you mentioned?" Mrs. Livingston's eyes widened slightly. "You heard something." "Probably just water in the pipes," Raymond said, not wanting to alarm her, yet something in her expression made him continue. Sounded almost like whispering. The color drained from Mrs. Livingston's face. "My husband says I'm being ridiculous," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear someone calling my name from the bathroom, even when no one's in there." Detective Sarah Lawson received the call about 317 Maple Street 6 days later. The case file landed on her desk on a Tuesday morning, a thin folder containing the preliminary report of a disappearance. Mrs. Emily Livingston, age 34, had vanished sometime during the night. Her husband reported waking to find her side of the bed empty, the bathroom door ajar, and no sign of her in the house. What caught Detective Lawson's attention wasn't the disappearance itself. Adults went missing for all sorts of reasons, and most returned or were located within days, but the statement from the husband. Mr. Livingston mentioned his wife's recent obsession with noises in their plumbing, specifically voices she claimed to hear coming from the drains. 2 days into the investigation, with Mrs. Livingston still missing, Detective Lawson interviewed the plumber who had serviced the house the week before. Raymond Mercer sat across from her in the station's interview room, his cap twisted in his hands as he recounted his experience at the Livingston home. "I've been a plumber for 30 years, he said, his voice low and steady. "I know every sound a pipe can make. What I heard in that drain, it wasn't normal." When Detective Lawson asked what made him so certain, Raymond's weathered face grew serious. "Because it knew my name," he said simply, "and I never introduced myself to Mrs. Livingston." The investigation of the Livingston house revealed nothing initially. No signs of struggle, no evidence of an intruder, no indication of where Emily Livingston might have gone. It wasn't until Detective Lawson ordered a more thorough examination of the plumbing system that they discovered something unusual. The bathroom drain connected to pipes that didn't match the house's original blueprints. These pipes diverted from the main sewer line, leading instead to a sealed space beneath the house, a room that didn't appear on any plans, hidden behind the newer foundation walls. When they broke through the wall in the basement, Detective Lawson was the first to enter the hidden space. The beam of her flashlight illuminated walls lined with smooth, dark stones, eerily similar to those used in well construction. The room was mostly empty, save for a small table and chair in the center, and several decades worth of dust. And scratched into the stone walls, hundreds of names. Some appeared decades old, others more recent. Near the bottom of the wall closest to the drain pipe, freshly carved, was Emily Livingston. The case remains officially unsolved. Emily Livingston was never found, despite extensive searches of the property and surrounding areas. The house at 317 Maple Street stands empty once again, a new "for sale" sign swaying gently in the front yard. Detective Lawson sometimes drives past the house on her way home. She never stops, but she always rolls up her windows just in case. Because sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is still, Residents on Maple Street report hearing whispers that seem to rise from the storm drains along the street. Whispers that, if you listen closely enough, sound almost like names being called one by one in voices filled with a terrible longing. And if you listen even closer, you might hear Emily Livingston's voice among them, soft and distant, as though speaking from somewhere very far away, or perhaps from somewhere directly beneath your feet. Story 8. The mailbox stood at the end of the cracked concrete path, its blue paint peeling in thin strips that curled like dried flower petals. Number 1742 Oakwood Lane had been abandoned for over a decade, yet somehow the mailbox was always full. The postal workers had long since stopped questioning it. They simply delivered what was addressed there, sliding envelopes and occasional small packages into the rusted metal container before continuing their routes through the quiet suburb of Millfield. From the street, the house itself appeared to be slowly dissolving into the landscape. Ivy had claimed the eastern wall entirely, creeping across windows that no longer reflected sunlight but instead absorbed it into dark, empty rooms. The front porch sagged slightly to the left, as if tired from years of waiting for footsteps that never came. Detective Morgan Reed stood at the curb, watching as forensics photographed the mailbox. The October wind carried the scent of rain and decaying leaves. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of the case file in her inside pocket. The folder contained surprisingly little a report filed by a delivery driver named Thomas Kellerman and several photocopied images that made her stomach tighten whenever she looked at them. "You sure you want to go through with the search warrant?" Detective Harris asked, stepping up beside her. His voice was low, almost apologetic. Could just be some elaborate prank. Reed didn't respond immediately. Her attention was fixed on the second-story window, where for a moment she thought she'd seen movement, just a shadow shifting behind dirty glass. But that was impossible. The electricity had been disconnected years ago, and multiple sweeps had confirmed no one was living there. No one had lived there since the Connors family moved out in 2011. At least, no one on any official record. The delivery was addressed to someone named Archivist, Reed finally said. No last name, no record of anyone by that name ever living here. And yet for years, this house has been receiving mail for this person. The facts were simple but unsettling. 3 days ago, Thomas Kellerman had been delivering a package to the abandoned house, something he'd done dozens of times before. But on this day, curiosity had gotten the better of him. The package was unsealed, with only a single piece of tape holding it closed. He later claimed he thought it might contain information about who was collecting these deliveries. Inside was a stack of photographs, neatly organized and labeled with dates. Every photograph showed a different family or individual who had lived in the house at 1742 Oakwood Lane, going back nearly 70 years. Some were candid shots through windows, others were taken from across the street. The most recent photos showed Thomas himself, standing at his delivery truck, checking his clipboard. The final photo was from that very morning, just moments before he had opened the package. "The camera work is meticulous," Reed murmured, flipping through the photocopies again. "Professional quality, and the angle of some of these shots, they had to have been taken from inside the house." The forensics team had finished with the mailbox and was now carefully collecting the most recent delivery, another small package that had arrived that morning. Reed watched as they sealed it in an evidence bag. Despite the chill in the air, she felt a bead of sweat roll down her spine. "Let's go in," she said, and Harris nodded, signaling to the uniformed officers waiting by their patrol cars. The front door opened with a long, aching creak. The sound seemed to extend beyond what should have been physically possible, as if the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath. Dust particles danced in the beams of their flashlights. The air inside was stale but not unpleasant. It smelled of old paper and something faintly metallic. The living room was empty except for a single wooden chair facing the front window. Reed's flashlight beam revealed footprints in the dust-fresh ones, crisscrossing the room in a pattern that suggested someone had been pacing. Harris pointed silently to a stack of mail on the mantelpiece, organized by date, each envelope carefully opened and resealed. As they moved deeper into the house, the floorboards whispered beneath their feet. The kitchen contained nothing but an old refrigerator, humming softly despite the house supposedly having no electricity. Reed hesitated before pulling it open. Inside were dozens of rolls of film, neatly labeled with dates and names. "I want all of this processed," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet space. "Every roll." The stairs to the second floor protested under their weight. At the top landing, Reed's flashlight illuminated a narrow hallway with 3 doors. 2 stood open, revealing empty bedrooms with faded wallpaper. The 3rd door was closed. Harris reached for the handle, then paused, looking back at Reed. "You hear that?" Reed held her breath. From behind the door came the faint, rhythmic sound of mechanical movement, the subtle click and whir of a camera shutter. When they opened the door, the room was empty. No camera, no photographer, just hundreds of photographs lining the walls, faces of everyone who had ever visited the house. Delivery drivers, postal workers, real estate agents. And now, in the center of the wall, directly facing the door, 2 new photographs had been carefully pinned. "Detective Reed, Detective Harris." The timestamp in the corner read 10:47 a.m., exactly 3 minutes ago. They searched the house for hours. They found no hidden rooms, no secret passages, no explanation for how someone could have taken those photos and vanished. The cameras that had been set up outside the house showed no one entering or leaving since their arrival. Days later, when the film from the refrigerator was developed, it revealed decades of surveillance, not just of the house and its occupants, but of the entire neighborhood. Families eating dinner, children playing in yards, couples arguing through open windows. The case remained open, a persistent question mark in Reed's career. The mail continued to arrive at 1742 Oakwood Lane, addressed to the archivist, though now it was redirected to the police department. Each envelope contained only blank paper, yet somehow, when held up to the light, at just the right angle, faint images could be seen, shadows of whoever had handled the envelope last. Reed never returned to the house, but sometimes, reviewing case notes late at night, she would feel a familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched through her own windows. And occasionally, in the background of family photos or in reflections on store windows, she would catch a glimpse of someone standing just at the edge of the frame, a figure that was never there when the photo was taken. The house at 1742 Oakwood Lane remained empty, but the mailbox was always full. Story 9, the funeral had gone as planned, the burial completed. But the next morning, when the cemetery groundskeeper made his rounds, he stopped in his tracks. The dirt had been disturbed, the coffin was open, the body was missing, and in its place, someone had left a note, "Not yet." Morning fog clung to the tombstones of Oakwood Cemetery, transforming the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. Martin Reeves had been the groundskeeper for nearly 15 years, his routine as predictable as the changing seasons. The soft crunch of his boots against the dewy grass was usually the only sound that disturbed the sacred silence of this place. But today, something felt different. The temperature had dropped overnight, leaving a chill that seemed to seep through Martin's jacket as he approached the freshly covered grave of Ulinter Blackwood. He noticed it from 20 yards away, the dark soil heaped differently than how the burial team had left it, not scattered by animals, but deliberately moved, methodically excavated. As Martin drew closer, his breath formed small clouds that hung suspended in the morning air. The grave had been dug up with precision. The coffin lid stood open at an angle, the polished mahogany catching the pale morning light. Inside, where Ulinter Blackwood's body should have rested, there was only the satin lining, now creased and empty. In the center lay a small note, handwritten on thick cream paper, "Not yet." Detective Sarah Landon arrived 40 minutes later, the cemetery now cordoned off with yellow police tape that fluttered gently in the breeze. She'd been with the Oakwood Police Department for 12 years, but had never encountered a case quite like this. Her notebook remained closed in her pocket as she first took in the scene, letting the details speak to her before recording them. "The family has been notified," she asked, her voice maintaining a professional steadiness that belied her unease. "Yes, Detective," Officer Mills confirmed, his young face pale beneath his cap. "Mr. Blackwood is on his way now." Ulinter Blackwood had been 38 when she died. A respected librarian at the local university, her death had been unexpected but apparently natural, a brain aneurysm that had taken her while she slept. Her husband, Professor James Blackwood, had found her in the morning, already cold beside him. That had been 5 days ago. As Detective Landon circled the disturbed grave, she noted the precision of the excavation. Whoever had done this had taken their time. There were no scattered piles of dirt, no frantic digging marks. This was the work of someone methodical, patient, someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had no fear of being caught. Detective, the medical examiner, Dr. Chen, approached with measured steps. "I've examined the coffin. There are no signs of damage to the locking mechanism. It was opened with a key." The weight of this information settled over them both. Only the funeral home and immediate family would have access to such a key. The sound of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. James Blackwood emerged from his silver sedan, his tall frame slightly stooped as if carrying an invisible burden. His eyes were red-rimmed behind wire-framed glasses, his academic's face lined with fresh grief. "Professor Blackwood," Landon greeted him, her tone gentle but reserved. "I'm Detective Landon. I'm very sorry about this situation." "Where is she?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Where is my wife?" The note was now sealed in an evidence bag, the 3 words "not yet," a cryptic message that seemed to hang in the air between them. Landon studied James Blackwood's face as she explained what they'd found. His expression shifted from confusion to horror, but something else flickered there too, something that made Landon's investigative instincts stir. Back at the station, Detective Landon spread the preliminary reports across her desk. The funeral home confirmed that all locks and security systems had been functioning properly. No alarms had been triggered. The night watchman had noticed nothing unusual during his rounds. The cemetery had no surveillance cameras. The peaceful resting place had never needed them before. Interviews with neighboring houses had yielded nothing. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. As Landon sipped her cooling coffee, she reviewed Ulinter Blackwood's autopsy report again. Dr. Chen had been thorough. The cause of death was indeed a cerebral aneurysm, natural causes, and yet the precision of the grave robbery suggested something deliberate, something planned. The soft ticking of the wall clock kept time as Landon looked through Alina's life. Respected academic, well-liked by colleagues, no known enemies. Her marriage to James seemed stable by all accounts, 15 years together, no children. A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. Officer Mills entered, carrying a thin file. "Detective, we pulled Professor Blackwood's financials as requested," he said, placing the folder on her desk. "And there's something else. Alina Blackwood had a life insurance policy, $2 million. The beneficiary is her husband." Landon nodded slowly. "That's not unusual." "No," Mills agreed. But according to the university records, the policy was upgraded just 3 months ago. The previous coverage was for $500,000. The detective let this information settle in her mind, a new piece to the puzzle that didn't yet have a clear place. That evening, as darkness fell over Oakwood, Detective Landon sat in her car outside the Blackwood residence, watching the professor move behind lit windows. She observed as he paced, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with his free hand. His silhouette against the curtains seemed agitated, different from the grief-stricken man at the cemetery. The next morning brought another development. Dr. Chen called Landon as dawn broke. "Detective, I've been reviewing the initial examination of Mrs. Blackwood's body." Her voice carried a measured restraint that immediately caught Landon's attention. The emergency responders noted something that wasn't followed up on. There was a small puncture mark on her neck. It was assumed to be from medical intervention, but upon reviewing the timeline, it was there before they arrived. Landon finished the thought. "Yes, and while a cerebral aneurysm is certainly possible, certain toxins can mimic the symptoms. Without the body, we can't confirm either way." The pieces were beginning to align differently now. Detective Landon drove to the university where both Blackwoods had worked. Alina in the library, James in the chemistry department, where he specialized in organic compounds and their effects on biological systems. As she walked the quiet halls of the chemistry building, a lab assistant named Marcus Finch shared something that changed the course of the investigation. "Professor Blackwood has been working with a rare plant extract," the young man explained, his voice hushed despite the empty lab. "It's known to cause rapid neurological failure in concentrated doses, nearly impossible to detect unless you're specifically looking for it." 3 days later, as rain fell softly on Oakwood Cemetery, Detective Landon stood again at Alina Blackwood's grave. The coffin had been returned to the earth, empty now, a reminder of the mystery that continued to unfold. James Blackwood was being held for questioning, his colleagues shocked, his alibi for the night of the grave robbery falling apart under scrutiny. But the question remained, where was Alina's body? And who had taken it? Someone trying to preserve evidence of a crime, or someone attempting to hide it forever? The note "not yet" remained the most puzzling piece. Not yet what? Not yet time for justice, not yet time for truth. As Landon turned to leave, she noticed a figure standing beneath a distant oak tree, watching. When she moved toward them, they disappeared into the mist, leaving only footprints in the wet grass, footprints that led away from the cemetery and into the unknown, just like the truth of what had happened to Alina Blackwood. The rain continued to fall, washing away tracks, dissolving evidence, but Detective Landon knew that some secrets refused to stay buried. Sometimes they find their way back to the surface, one disturbed patch of earth at a time. Story 10: The Mystery of the Whispering House. She had set out to revamp the nursery before the little one's arrival. The walls wore a faded blue, a color that whispered of bygone tales hidden within its layers. As she applied the first layer of white paint, a revelation unfolded beneath letters emerging faintly at first, then sharpening into clarity. A message etched beneath the surface. "Don't let it hear you." Her breath hitched. Stepping back, her gaze fell upon it, tiny handprints imprinted in the fresh paint, positioned too high for any child's reach. The discovery within the nursery of the Morgan household marked the inception of what would later be termed the Whispering House Enigma. The young couple had acquired the Victorian-style residence mere months prior at an unbelievably low price. The realtor had mentioned only minor cosmetic issues, neglecting to disclose the property's shadowy past. Detective Sarah Klein approached the doorbell, a notebook clutched in hand. A woman answered, her expectant belly protruding beneath paint-splattered overalls. Weariness clung to her, evident in the dark circles rimming her eyes. It was clear she had not slept in days. The detective observed the tremble in the woman's hands as she recounted the eerie message and handprints. The previous owners vanished abruptly, the woman revealed. Neighbors mentioned they left in the dead of night, no moving van, just essentials packed into their car. Detective Klein traversed the historic abode, her footsteps echoing on aged floorboards. Standing in the nursery, she scrutinized the partially painted wall. The message lingered where the fresh paint had been abandoned midway. Beside it, 5 small handprints embedded in the wet paint, situated at the height of an adult's shoulder. Back at the precinct, Detective Klein delved into the property records. The house had changed owners 8 times in 30 years, a remarkably high turnover rate. Each family had resided for less than 2 years. More disconcerting were the child welfare reports associated with 3 of those families. Children had reported whispers from the walls and a sensation of being watched as they slept. Delving further, the detective unearthed construction records and historical archives. The house had once belonged to Eleanor Blackwood, a wealthy widow without offspring who had overseen a small orphanage on the premises during the early industrial era. Newspaper clippings referenced 5 children who had vanished from her care. Authorities of the time suspected they had fled, a common occurrence for orphans in that era. Upon Eleanor's passing, renovators stumbled upon a sealed chamber behind the nursery wall. Inside lay children's belongings, tiny shoes, toys, and garments, but no remains. The case grew cold, relegated to dusty archives. Detective Klein interviewed former inhabitants, piecing together a chilling pattern. Each family with children reported inexplicable happenings, toys rearranged overnight, childish laughter resonating through empty corridors, and crayon sketches materializing on walls. Most dismissed these occurrences as figments of imagination until the writing surfaced. The message varied slightly in different accounts. Don't let them find you. Don't make a sound. Don't let it hear you. Always the same handwriting, always unveiled during nursery repaints. A forensic linguist scrutinized photographs of the writing and confirmed its match to samples from Eleanor Blackwood's journals. More unsettling were the handprints, uniform in size and placement over decades, despite different children inhabiting the home. The investigation took a darker turn when the detective persuaded the current owners to permit ground-penetrating radar in the basement. The technician identified anomalies in the readings, 5 distinct shapes beneath the concrete floor, each approximate to a child's size. Workers breached the concrete, unveiling a grim revelation. 5 small sets of remains arranged in a circle. Forensic analysis indicated the children had perished during Aliner's tenure at the house. Each child bore a pendant engraved with their name, the 5 orphans who had allegedly absconded. The detective sanctioned the spraying of luminol throughout the nursery. In the darkness, handprints glowed on every wall, concealed beneath layers of paint, invisible to the unaided eye. Scores of them at varying elevations, as though the children had endeavored to ascend. Aliner's journals, salvaged from county archives, unveiled her warped rationale. She believed orphaned children harbored unique spiritual energy. By confining them in the hidden chamber, she speculated she could siphon their life force to elongate her own existence. The children had etched their warnings into the wall with nails and slivers of metal, desiring future occupants to uncover their fate. The case concluded with the respectful interment of the 5 victims. Their names were finally documented not as runaways but as casualties of foul play. The residence remained vacant thereafter, the pregnant couple declining to return even for their possessions. Detective Klein submitted her ultimate report, incorporating images of the luminol-illuminated handprints and the concealed message. She remarked that although justice had been served for the original victims, an inexplicable presence lingered within that house, something that persisted in reaching out through layers of paint and time. The nursery walls were raised during remediation, yet laborers reported hearing children's whispers emanating from the wreckage. None were willing to return after their shifts. The dwelling was eventually condemned, becoming another unsolved case in a musty dossier, physical proof of closure but spiritual enigmas destined to remain unanswered. The detective retained a photograph from the case, 5 luminol handprints glowing in the shadows, a haunting reminder that certain crimes leave imprints that no quantity of fresh paint can obscure. Story 11. It appeared in her mailbox, wrapped within a simple envelope devoid of any sender's details. A solitary brass key, weathered by time. The homeowner couldn't place it, yet a sense of familiarity lingered. Testing it in every lock she owned yielded no results. It didn't belong to her. But when she placed it on the coffee table, the decrepit grandfather clock in the hallway emitted a solitary, eerie chime despite its years of silence. Sarah Miller alerted the authorities upon discovering the enigmatic key. What began as a peculiar incident soon unraveled into a spine-chilling criminal inquiry that shook the tranquil suburban community. The responding officer initially brushed off her concerns. Just a key in the mail, likely a mistake, he speculated. However, Sarah persisted that something felt awry. Reluctantly, the officer took the key as evidence, mostly to pacify her, sealing it in a small evidence bag that would later become pivotal in a sprawling investigation. Detective Robert Harmon received the case file during the morning briefing. A seasoned investigator with a special victims unit, he possessed an instinct for cases that transcended their seemingly innocuous beginnings. The brass key sat on his desk, unassuming yet disquieting. Background checks on Sarah unveiled no criminal past. A retired high school English teacher, widowed, with grown children residing across the country. No red flags in her financial records, phone logs, or online presence. She seemed precisely as she portrayed herself, an unwitting recipient of something peculiar. Forensic analysis yielded only Sarah's fingerprints on the key. The envelope divulged nothing but a standard postmark from the regional distribution center. No DNA, no trace evidence. The key, a run-of-the-mill Schlage, though well used and aged. A breakthrough materialized unexpectedly when Detective Harmon decided to cross-reference the key's unique bidding pattern in the department database. A cold case from 7 years prior documented a matching key pattern linked to a storage unit where investigators had unearthed bloodied carpet, cutting tools, and photos of unidentified women. The original investigation had stalled due to insufficient evidence to pinpoint a suspect. Harmon delved into the dusty case files. The retired detective who had worked the case had since left. The storage unit had been rented under a fake identity, paid in cash. Surveillance footage had been overwritten long ago. The evidence collected had provided partial DNA samples, but no matches in any criminal database. The photos retrieved from the storage unit depicted 5 women, all appearing unconscious. Only 3 had been identified during the initial investigation, all reported missing but never located. Their cases remained open, classified as presumed homicides without bodies. Sarah Miller recognized none of the women in the images shown to her. Her anxiety mounted as the investigation progressed, leading her to fortify her home with new locks and a security system. The lingering question, why had someone sent her this key? Harmon ordered a fresh analysis of the original evidence utilizing modern techniques. The partial DNA sample was expanded and traced through genealogical databases. This yielded a distant familial match, a second cousin twice removed from the suspect. Tracing back through family trees, investigators zeroed in on Harold Jenkins, who had lived 2 streets away from Sarah until departing roughly 6 years ago. His current whereabouts remained a mystery. Further probing unveiled that Jenkins had been a substitute teacher at the same school as Sarah, though they had minimal documented interaction. His work history displayed sporadic employment, prolonged unexplained gaps, and frequent moves. His former residence turned up nothing out of the ordinary upon inspection. Neighbors described him as unassuming, solitary, someone who kept to himself, a common narrative following revelations about predators lurking unnoticed. The burning question remained, why send the key now? Why to Sarah Miller? Harmon speculated it could be a trophy, a threat, or possibly a grim invitation. The hunt for Jenkins intensified. His driver's license had expired. No activity on credit cards, no tax filings. The digital footprints individuals typically leave behind were conspicuously absent, hinting at a deliberate effort to remain untraceable. The true horror of the case unraveled when authorities probed a small cabin registered to Jenkins' deceased mother. Beneath the worn wooden floorboards, investigators uncovered a concealed chamber accessible solely via trapdoor. Inside, meticulously arranged shelves housed numerous identical brass keys, each labeled with a name and date. 5 keys corresponded to the women from the photographs. The other keys, 27 in total, suggested a chilling implication of additional victims unknown to authorities before. Buried behind the cabin, forensic teams unearthed human remains. The excavation persisted for weeks as investigators unearthed multiple bodies in varying stages of decay. Sarah received constant protection as the nationwide manhunt for Jenkins expanded. Behavioral analysts posited that the key symbolized a twisted gesture, Jenkins selecting Sarah to admire his handiwork. The media dubbed him the Keymaster, a moniker that swiftly spread through national news. Fear permeated the community as residents questioned how such horror could lurk unnoticed among them. Tracking dogs traced a scent from the cabin into the surrounding wilderness. Search teams combed dense forested areas. Thermal drones surveyed terrain too treacherous for ground units. The manhunt evolved into one of the region's largest. A wildlife photographer exploring remote woods captured an image resembling Jenkins. The grainy photo depicted a bearded man with hollow eyes carrying a backpack, venturing deeper into the wilderness. Authorities closed in on the area, establishing a perimeter. Tactical teams navigated challenging landscapes while profilers anticipated Jenkins would not surrender. They speculated he might have prepared for this scenario with hidden supplies and escape routes. The final showdown occurred when a patrol officer encountered Jenkins trying to cross a river. Rather than surrender, Jenkins retreated to higher ground, barricading himself in an abandoned fire observation tower. Negotiators attempted communication for hours to no avail. When tactical units breached the tower, they discovered Jenkins dead from a self-inflicted wound. Beside his body lay a journal detailing his crimes, alongside a brass key identical to the one Sarah had received. Inside a waterproof container, investigators found additional evidence, including photos, maps marking burial sites, and personal belongings taken from victims, a meticulously preserved record of atrocities spanning nearly a decade. The journal's closing entry addressed Sarah directly. "You never noticed me, but I noticed everything about you." The key unlocks nothing because what I wanted to offer you can't be accessed with metal, only with recognition. Now everyone will recall my name. The ensuing investigation identified 32 victims in total. Families who had spent years pondering the fate of missing loved ones finally received closure, albeit accompanied by the unbearable weight of confirmed tragedy. Sarah never returned to her house, unable to reconcile the horror that had brushed so close to her mundane existence. The grandfather clock that had mysteriously chimed was scrutinized and found to house a discreet wireless receiver Jenkins had been observing, awaiting the moment she received his present. The case endures as one of the most unsettling instances of predatory behavior concealed beneath a veneer of normality. Psychological researchers persist in studying Jenkins' writings, seeking insights to identify similar offenders before they strike. And somewhere in an evidence vault, a collection of brass keys rests as mute testament to lives cut short, each key opening nothing, yet unlocking a devastating truth about the darkness that sometimes lurks behind unremarkable facades. Story 12. The new occupants believed it was merely peeling wallpaper, a minor inconvenience in their newfound abode. Yet as they delicately stripped away the layers, a hidden narrative began to reveal itself. Inked onto the surface beneath, repeatedly inscribed, was a single name: Alina Winters. The name consumed every nook and cranny of the wall, etched in a frenzied, uneven hand. It bore no connection to the previous proprietors, nor did it exist in any official records. Intrigued, they turned to the online realm for answers, where a solitary search result awaited them: a missing persons report from decades past. And the twist that sent shivers down their spines. The woman depicted in the photograph bore an uncanny resemblance to the one who had parted with the house Michael and Sarah Klein. The Kleins had never planned an immediate overhaul of their Victorian-era dwelling. The allure of the old-fashioned abode, with its intricate woodwork and soaring ceilings, had captured their heart. The reasonable price tag and the taciturn, silver-streaked-haired previous owner, Margaret Cavendish, who appeared eager to sell and relocate across the country, sealed the deal. The journey into the mystery commenced with a simple water stain in the master bedroom. Sarah's keen eye caught sight of a yellowish blemish spreading across the floral wallpaper, hinting at a hidden secret. With a gentle touch, Michael exposed a new layer beneath the damaged paper. Intrigued, they cautiously continued peeling back the layers. The first layer unveiled outdated paisley patterns from the 70s, followed by striped paper from an earlier era. However, it was the third layer that harbored the unexpected: a series of writings. Dark ink against faded beige paper, bearing a name, Alina Winters, repeated endlessly in increasingly desperate and erratic handwriting across the expanse. "Who is Alina Winters?" Sarah murmured, her fingers tracing the unsettling script. The revelation unsettled them deeply. That evening, Michael sat at their kitchen island, engrossed in property records on his laptop. The house had changed ownership multiple times, but Alina Winters remained a ghost in the archives. Margaret Cavendish, the seller, was a mere alias. Sarah joined him, clutching a mug of coffee. "Try searching just the name," she suggested. The internet search yielded meager results until they stumbled upon a digitized newspaper article from 30 years prior. Alina Winters, 27 years of age, reported missing in the winter months. The accompanying black and white image portrayed a young woman with dark locks and distinctive eyes mirroring those of Margaret Cavendish. "This article dates back decades," Michael spoke softly over the hum of the refrigerator. "Margaret could be the right age now, but..." Sarah's throat tightened. "The missing woman's story remains unresolved. No body, no suspects." Their initial curiosity morphed into an unwavering fixation. Sarah delved into the past homeowner's history, while their renovation plans took a backseat to their impromptu sleuthing sessions. They uncovered that Margaret Cavendish had possessed the house for a mere 7 months before passing it on an anomaly, considering the rigorous paperwork they themselves had endured. The retired detective assigned to Alina's case recalled the investigation vividly. Alina Winters, reported missing by her roommate, had vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle at her residence, no leads, just a void. The case had grown cold swiftly. Tension hung in the air as Michael cautiously inquired, "Did you ever come across a Margaret Cavendish?" A pregnant pause followed. "No recollection of that name. Why do you ask?" Upon sharing their findings and juxtaposing photos of both women, the detective pledged to look into the matter. In a matter of days, a current detective reached out, seeking permission to scrutinize the peculiar wall. Their home transformed into an active crime scene, with forensics meticulously documenting and removing sections of the wallpaper. Analysis of the ink dated it back 30 years, but handwriting comparisons with Alina's journals proved inconclusive. Meanwhile, Sarah stumbled upon a concealed compartment beneath the bedroom closet's floorboards. Among the items laid within was Alina Winters' driver's license, accompanied by various identification cards bearing different aliases. Each card depicted the same face with subtle alterations, a different hair color, glasses, and expressions. The final ID, Margaret Cavendish, aligned with their house seller. Attempts to trace Margaret's whereabouts using the provided forwarding address led to dead ends. Her contact details had been severed, her bank account closed. Margaret Cavendish had vanished, mirroring Alina Winters' fate decades earlier. A pivotal revelation altered the course of the investigation. DNA extracted from hair strands entwined deep within the wall cavity matched Alina Winters, while fingerprints lifted from the writing matched a distinct profile, Rebecca Eldridge, a psychiatric patient institutionalized shortly after Alina's disappearance. Rebecca suffered from severe dissociative identity disorder, with one of her alter egos assuming the persona of Alina. The investigation unveiled a chilling truth. Rebecca, once Alina's close friend, had fixated on her to a point of obsession. When Alina spurned her advances, Rebecca's psyche fractured, adopting Alina's identity and fabricating an intricate web of personas to sustain the charade. The scrawled name on the wall symbolized Rebecca's desperate struggle for self-identity, a tangible representation of her shattered mind. From their front porch, Michael and Sarah observed as forensic teams meticulously excavated sections of their backyard, guided by ground-penetrating radar hinting at buried secrets. The once cold case had ignited with fervor. The unearthed remains belonged to Alina Winters. Rebecca Eldridge, alias Margaret Cavendish, was eventually apprehended attempting to flee with yet another alias. Confronted with irrefutable evidence, the Margaret Faadeck crumbled, revealing a new persona, one confessing to Eleanor's murder, born out of jealousy. The names on the wall served as both a memorial and a manifestation of guilt, inscribed by a fractured mind grasping at shards of truth. Justice for Eleanor arrived 3 decades late, while Michael and Sarah's dream home etched its name in true crime lore, a dwelling where the walls themselves whispered of a long-buried secret. Story 13. The house had sat abandoned, shrouded in silence for what felt like an eternity. Whispers of the past lingered in the air, tales of the young woman who had vanished without a trace. When the new occupants crossed the threshold, they were met with a peculiar sight, the bedroom door stubbornly locked from within. With effort, they forced it open, revealing a room frozen in time. The atmosphere was thick with neglect, dust dancing in the dim light. Yet amidst the stillness, something stirred unease in their hearts. The bed was neatly made, the mirror devoid of blemish. A lone candle stood on the desk, its flame long extinguished, leaving behind tears of wax frozen in time. A notebook lay open, its pages whispering secrets untold. Detective Morgan delved into its contents, each word a breadcrumb leading deeper into the mystery. Elise Winters, 26 years of age, had penned her thoughts in elegant script, each stroke a piece of her essence. But as the entries progressed, a sense of urgency crept in, culminating in a chilling revelation on the final page. "I know he's watching me tonight," the ink pleaded, a plea unheard in the night she vanished. Forensic experts combed the room, seeking truths hidden in the shadows. Elise, a diligent paralegal, had uncovered discrepancies that threatened to shatter the facade of a prestigious law firm. Her pursuit of justice had led her to a dangerous crossroads where secrets festered like wounds left unhealed. The room held no overt signs of struggle, only a haunting stillness that belied the turmoil within. A solitary candle stood vigil, a silent witness to the events that unfolded in its flickering glow. Underneath its melted remains, a truth waited to be unveiled. As the investigation deepened, hidden compartments were revealed, secrets locked away yearning to be set free. A key led to a vault of damning evidence, a web of deceit spun by those who believed themselves untouchable. The recording spoke volumes, voices echoing through the darkness of corruption. Elise's bravery echoed in the stark truth she unearthed, a truth that threatened to dismantle the carefully constructed facade of power and privilege. Vincent Harriman, a man of influence, stood at the center of the storm, his actions casting a shadow over the lives he deemed expendable. The truth, like a beacon in the night, illuminated the darkest corners of his soul. Through hidden passages and concealed truths, justice slowly unfurled its wings, reaching out to grasp those who thought themselves beyond its reach. The room, a silent witness to the horrors within, bore witness to the unraveling of a heinous crime. In the end, justice prevailed, though the price was steep. Elise's legacy, a room frozen in time, stood as a testament to her unwavering courage. The house, a relic of the past, stood as a silent sentinel to the darkness that once dwelled within its walls. As night fell, casting shadows over the empty house, a flicker of light danced in the upstairs window. Some whispered of a presence lingering, of a soul at peace knowing that justice had been served. The house stood as a monument to the truth, a beacon of hope in a world tainted by lies. And so the house remained, its secrets laid bare, but its memory eternal. The legacy of Elise Winters lived on, a testament to the power of one voice against the forces of darkness. In the stillness of the night, whispers of justice echoed through the empty rooms, a lullaby to soothe the restless souls who dared to listen. Story 14, the apartment had a history shrouded in shadows of the past. The heating system groaned softly, the pipes whispered tales of bygone days. It was all part of the building's ancient charm, or so they thought, until she heard it. A voice, a mere echo, drifted through the vents like a ghostly whisper in the night. It wasn't the usual sounds of neighbors going about their lives. It was different. It called to her, beckoning her closer. Intrigued, she lined in, her heart beating a curious rhythm. A chill breeze brushed against her cheek, carrying with it a message, almost teasingly. I see you. I know you're listening. Investigator Morgan Shaw stood in the heart of the empty apartment, her gaze fixed on the rusted vent cover that had been pried open. The forensic team moved around her with precision, capturing every detail with their cameras. Alina Reeves, the missing woman, had left a mystery behind that defied logic. She mentioned hearing voices through the vents, Officer Patel recounted, his voice steady. But the building dismissed her concerns as mere creaks of an old structure. Shaw knelt by the vent, tracing the scratch marks along its edges. These marks weren't from tools, they were desperate, almost frantic, as if someone had tried to claw their way out from within. The victim, Alina, had been a beloved figure, a teacher with a penchant for nurturing life, both in her classroom and through her thriving houseplants at home. Her absence had left a void in the lives of many. Her sister shared during an interview how Alina had spiraled into paranoia before vanishing. She believed unseen eyes watched her, voices whispered to her through the very walls of her sanctuary. Shaw surveyed the apartment anew, noting the small details that spoke of a haunting presence: the neatly made bed, the abandoned coffee mug, the chair placed strategically beneath the vent as if waiting for a listener. The evidence uncovered sent shivers down Shaw's spine. Fibers entwined in the vent grill matched Alina's favorite cardigan. A mysterious fingerprint, not belonging to the victim, lingered on the inside of the vent cover. But most chilling were the audio recordings from Alina's phone, capturing eerie conversations that danced on the edge of reality. A dive into the building's past unearthed unsettling truths. Previous tenants had fled, citing strange occurrences within the walls. One spoke of voices beckoning from unseen corners, another of hallucinations induced by a malevolent force. Harold Weber, the superintendent with a cool exterior, held keys to every door, a fact that raised suspicions. As the investigation deepened, a hidden passage behind a loose tile in Alina's bathroom revealed a clandestine world within the walls. An intruder had made a home there, watching, listening, whispering. Shaw's team searched Weber's pristine apartment, finding a trove of recordings and keepsakes that painted a picture of obsession and possession. Weber's arrest brought a chilling revelation to light. He believed he was a conduit for the building's secrets, a vessel through which it communicated with its inhabitants. The victims he chose, the lives he invaded, all became part of his twisted narrative. The trial that followed showcased a battle between reality and delusion, with the jury swiftly delivering a verdict of guilt. As Weber was led away, his unsettling smile lingered, a reminder of the darkness that had seeped through the building's walls. The whispers that once haunted Alina now echoed through the empty rooms, a spectral reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within. The building, with its new facade and fresh coat of paint, stood as a silent witness to the secrets buried within its walls. And so the apartment building remained an enigma, a place where echoes of the past mingled with the present. Residents spoke of whispers in the dead of night, of cold drafts carrying voices from forgotten realms. The heating system continued its symphony of groans, the pipes whispered tales of those long gone. It was nothing out of the ordinary, or so they tried to convince themselves. Story 15. The gentle current whispered secrets as it caressed the glassy, still water that morning. The fisherman's eyes skimmed the tranquil surface, almost missing the peculiar sight of a lone suitcase bobbing near the shore. Initially dismissing it as discarded old clothes, his curiosity was piqued as he approached and caught a whiff of a thick, cloying stench that hung heavy in the air, a scent unmistakable in its grimness. The case was ensnared in chains, its edges weathered by time and exposure to the elements. When authorities pried it open, it wasn't garments they discovered within, but strands of hair, fingers frozen in a desperate grip, and at the very bottom, a haunting note that simply stated, "This isn't the first." Detective Sarah Mercer arrived at the somber scene, a delicate handkerchief pressed to her nose to shield her from the overpowering odor. The victim, a woman in her mid-30s with dark locks and now pallid skin, bore the markings of her watery grave. The meticulous medical examiner painstakingly documented every detail before the body was gently lifted away. What struck Mercer amidst the grimness was not just the callous disposal of the victim, but the eerie care taken in presenting her manicured nails, freshly styled hair, clad in luxurious attire. She was not dispatched here, Mercer mused, her gaze fixed on the murky shore as the water whispered its secrets. She was readied, displayed. The victim was identified as Catherine Walsh, a successful real estate agent known for her dealings in high-end properties. Divorced, childless, residing alone in an affluent neighborhood, she was described by colleagues as driven, meticulous, and fiercely private. Her disappearance was reported by her assistant when she failed to show up for a critical showing with affluent clients. She would never miss such an appointment, the assistant maintained during interrogation. That sale meant everything to her. Investigators meticulously combed through Walsh's impeccably kept modernist abode, a place of pristine perfection. Designer furniture meticulously arranged, not a speck of dust in sight. The refrigerator housed neatly organized meals, labeled by the day. Her closet was a symphony of color-coordinated garments and shoes carefully stored in protective coverings. Yet a lone anomaly lingered in her home office, a slightly ajar drawer. Inside, a leather-bound journal lay in wait. The final entry ominously whispered, "He's watching again. Same car, different plates." A digital excavation of Walsh's email unveiled a chilling pattern, dozens of messages from unknown senders, all bearing the ominous phrase, "I see your perfection," transmitted at precisely the same time on various days. Her internet search history hinted at her growing unease, with frequent quests for home security systems and personal protection devices. Mercer wove these threads together, linking the victim's meticulous presentation in death to the eerie precision of the crime scene. "Our perpetrator is methodical," she confided to her partner. "This was no crime of passion. This was a ritual." A breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source, a local pawn shop owner recognizing Walsh's distinctive emerald necklace among the wares. The culprit, a regular named Michael Linden, a nondescript maintenance worker. Surveillance footage painted a damning picture of Linden frequenting Walsh's building, sometimes with his maintenance cart, sometimes without, always during her absences while conducting property viewings. Upon searching Linden's modest abode, investigators unearthed a chilling sight: the walls adorned with clandestine photos of Walsh and other women, all sharing a striking resemblance, all captured without their knowledge. Some portraits were ruthlessly crossed out in red. Walsh was the third victim. Concealed behind a false panel in his closet lay a shrine, an eerie collection of items belonging to each victim meticulously arranged. a lock of hair, tissues stained with lipstick, keys, and receipts. Each assemblage accompanied by a small notebook chronicling daily routines, preferences, and habits. The interrogation room turned frigid as Lyndon was brought in. His demeanor remained eerily composed, his appearance neat, his voice devoid of emotion. "They were flawed," he finally intoned, his tone flat. "Presented as flawless, but I saw through their facade. Catherine's desk drawer was always a mess. Her lipstick always missed a spot. Her perfection was a lie." The search for the two victims alluded to in his cryptic note led investigators to remote locations where two more suitcases were dredged from the depths. Each harbored a woman mirroring Walsh's appearance, an agent, a perfectionist, a victim of Lyndon's obsession. During his trial, Lyndon sat unmoving, his expression vacant as the prosecution unveiled his meticulous methodology. Months of stalking, invading their sanctuaries, studying their lives. And ultimately his twisted attempt to correct what he perceived as their imperfections, adorning them with care before extinguishing their lives. As the families of the victims sat in heavy silence, the judge pronounced a life sentence on Lyndon, a sentence devoid of any possibility of release. For Detective Mercer, the case was officially closed, but shadows of doubt lingered. What unfurled Lyndon's fixation on these women? What inner blemish was he attempting to erase through his macabre acts? Downstream, the river continued its meandering journey, its waters cleansing all traces of the grim tale. Yet in Mercer's precinct, on her desk, lay copies of those haunting notebooks, a stark reminder that darkness can often lurk behind the facade of normalcy. And sometimes the most perilous predators are those who dwell in plain sight, watching, waiting for a solitary flaw to expose itself. Story 16, A Whisper in the Dust. It began with a mere pocket dial, a mishap of technology resulting in static and muffled sounds. The operator almost dismissed it as insignificant until a voice pierced through the interference. A woman's voice filled with frantic whispers, urgently conveying, "He's here." He, and then an eerie silence descended. The phone number traced back to an empty house, a dwelling abandoned for years, frozen in time. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbances that could explain the mysterious call. Yet in the heart of the desolate kitchen, amidst the layers of dust, the phone rested on the counter, its screen eerily aglow. The call had been placed just moments ago. Detective Morgan Reed found herself drawn to the playback button, compelled to listen to the haunting whisper for the 5th time. The voice lingered in her mind, echoing desperation, terror, and impossibility. This abandoned property had once belonged to the Sullivan family, who had fled after a devastating house fire ravaged the West Wing. Since then, the house stood silent, untouched by human presence. The caretaker swore by its solitude, claiming no one had trespassed in years. "Background check on the number," Morgan inquired of her partner, Detective Walsh. The revelation that the number belonged to Catherine Sullivan, the deceased daughter of the family, added another layer of perplexity to the enigma. Catherine had perished 3 years prior in a tragic car accident, her existence fading into memory. As Morgan gazed at the phone enclosed within an evidence bag, a puzzle unfolded before her. A phone once owned by a deceased woman, now making calls from a vacant house. The dust around the device appeared disturbed solely beneath its placement, as if it had materialized out of thin air. The forensic team scoured for clues but found nothing substantial. No clear fingerprints adorned the phone, only elusive smudges that defied identification. No trace of footprints leading to or from the house, no breaches in the locked doors or sealed windows. The recording of the call became the focal point of their inquiry, encapsulating 11 seconds of static, faint breaths, and 5 chilling words. Voice analysis linked the voice to Catherine Sullivan with a staggering 98% certainty, aligning with archived recordings of her past. The timestamp revealed an uncanny detail. The call had occurred precisely at the moment of Catherine's demise 3 years earlier, down to the minute. Morgan and Walsh delved into Catherine's past, interviewing those who had known her intimately. Her father, now remarried, appeared genuinely bewildered by the unfolding enigma. Her mother, residing in a modest apartment, crumbled upon hearing the recording, recognizing her daughter's voice in the whispers of fear. Catherine's former boyfriend, Mark Jennings, seemed to have a solid alibi for the night of the call, his whereabouts confirmed by witnesses and security footage. The house had stood vacant. The call should have been impossible, yet it had transpired. The investigation hit a standstill until a call from Catherine's mother reignited the flame of curiosity. "I found something in her belongings," she trembled over the phone. "Katie kept a journal, the final entry. You must see it." Within the worn pages of the journal lay a haunting narrative of Catherine's relationship with Mark, initial love, followed by a descent into control, isolation, and ultimately fear. The last entry bore a chilling prophecy. "He discovered my intentions to leave. His rage knows no bounds. If harm befalls me, it will not be accidental." Confronted once more, Mark's veneer of composure cracked under the weight of the journal's revelations. "Do you accuse me based on her words?" he challenged. "There is no proof in mere writings." Morgan probed further, pointing out discrepancies in his narrative. "You were the first responder at the accident scene, preceding emergency services," she emphasized. "How do you explain that?" "I was concerned when she didn't arrive. I went in search of her," Mark stammered. "But her vehicle veered off a remote road. How did you locate her so swiftly?" A pallor overtook his features. "I told you I was worried." Revisiting the site of Catherine's fatal accident, investigators unearthed a chilling discovery buried 20 feet from the crash site: Catherine's actual phone. The device found in the house was a decoy, a backup concealed at her parents' abode. Examination of the buried phone unveiled deleted messages exchanged between Catherine and her sister on the fateful night. "Mark has discovered my plans to leave him. He's tailing me in his car. And later, he's forcing me off the road." A reevaluation of Catherine's autopsy photos unveiled a grim truth. The injuries sustained were not solely indicative of a vehicular accident. Defensive wounds marred her hands, bruising patterns hinted at strangulation. When authorities moved to apprehend Mark, they encountered an empty abode, haunted by remnants of his obsession with Catherine, a shrine of stolen mementos, photographs, and writings chronicling her tragic demise. Among his possessions lay evidence of audio manipulation software and scripts detailing the creation of the ghost call, a macabre ploy to confound investigators and torment Catherine's grieving family. The scope of the investigation expanded, unraveling a sinister thread connecting Mark to other cases where he had served as an emergency responder. 2 more instances surfaced where young women met untimely deaths, veiled under the guise of accidents. Both had shared tumultuous relationships with Mark. 6 days into the manhunt, officers stumbled upon Mark's vehicle stationed outside the Sullivan residence. Inside, he sat transfixed in the kitchen, fixated on a phone identical to Catherine's. He offered no resistance as he was led away. During interrogation, Mark's facade crumbled. She refused to be silenced, he confessed to Morgan. Even after her silence, her accusations lingered. I needed the world to hear her voice, to believe she still existed. A specter cannot testify against me. The jury swiftly rendered a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder, culminating in a swift deliverance of justice. As the pronouncement echoed through the courtroom, Catherine's mother clung to the journal, a testament to her daughter's unwavering voice. The resolution was not born of supernatural intervention, but from the echoes of Catherine's words, her fears etched in ink, her final plea for sanctuary. The phone from the abandoned house now rests in an evidence vault, a relic of a chilling saga. At times, officers swear they catch a phantom ring emanating from its depths, though its power source had long been removed. Catherine's tale endures, not as a spectral legend, but as a poignant reminder that victims, even in silence, find ways to be heard. Story 17, The Realtor's Hidden Secret. The listing from the realtor promised a charming suburban property with character and history, perfect for the Mercer family. Nestled among bare winter trees, the two-story house exuded a sense of nostalgia, its faded siding whispering tales of the past. Little did the Mercers know that beneath the surface of their new home lay a secret waiting to be uncovered. As the family began the tedious task of pulling up the old carpet, a hidden door revealed itself, shrouded in mystery. With a heavy, rusted handle that resisted their efforts, it took 3 of them to pry it open, revealing a staircase leading into the unknown depths below. The air that rushed up to meet them was stale, thick with the scent of damp earth, hinting at secrets long buried. Expecting a storage space, the family instead found a small basement room. In its center stood a solitary chair, illuminated by a swaying light bulb above. But what truly caught their attention were the rows of photographs adorning the wall photographs of themselves. Images captured from within their own home, moments frozen in time without their knowledge. Detective Sarah Connors arrived at the scene with her partner, the air heavy with anticipation. The crime scene unit had already secured the area with fluttering yellow tape, marking the beginning of a dark mystery waiting to be unraveled. Mrs. Mercer's tremulous voice had described the unsettling discovery, prompting Connors to meticulously document every detail before further exploration. The basement, though small, held a chilling presence. The concrete walls, painted a dull gray, seemed to absorb the light, casting eerie shadows across the room. The chair, bolted to the floor, stood as a silent sentinel in the center, while the photographs whispered tales of intrusion and violation. As the investigation delved deeper, the absence of forced entry or theft only deepened the sense of unease. Fingerprints belonging to past owners of the property littered the space, hinting at a history tainted by unseen eyes and unseen hands. The house had changed hands multiple times, each family unknowingly becoming part of a twisted narrative woven within its walls. Interviews with previous owners unveiled a web of deception and secrecy surrounding the property. Blueprints altered, permits withdrawn, records redacted. Each piece of the puzzle added to the growing sense of foreboding. But it was the contractor's denial of the existence of the basement that sent shivers down their spines, questioning the very fabric of reality within the house. Digital forensics uncovered a trove of hidden surveillance, capturing not only the Mercers but every family that had resided there. From intimate moments to mundane routines, the voyeuristic gaze of a phantom observer had seeped into every corner of their lives. Audio recordings, hidden throughout the house, revealed a level of intrusion that chilled even the seasoned detectives to the core. The journal found in the hidden monitoring station belonged to Edward Kelvin, the house's enigmatic builder who had vanished without a trace. His meticulous notes painted a picture of obsession, of a man consumed by the families he watched from the shadows. The final entry, ominous in its simplicity, heralded the arrival of the next unsuspecting residents. The manhunt for Kelvin uncovered a twisted recluse, his mind entwined with the architecture of the house he considered his domain. His delusions of guardianship overrode any sense of intrusion, blurring the lines between observer and intruder. As the truth unfolded, the Mercer family made a hasty exit, leaving behind a house tainted by the echoes of unseen eyes. Kelvin's trial exposed the depths of his voyeuristic network, revealing a house designed not just for living, but for watching a stage where families unknowingly performed for an audience of one. As the property was razed to the ground, the families haunted by their unknowing participation in Kelvin's twisted game were left to wonder if they were ever truly alone in their most private moments. And so, the legacy of Edward Kelvin lived on in whispers and shadows, a reminder that sometimes the walls around us hold secrets darker than we dare to imagine. The families who crossed paths with his twisted obsession would forever question the sanctity of their homes, haunted by the lingering presence of a man who believed he owned not just a house, but the lives within it. Story 18. The aged apartment held its secrets, pipes that groaned in the night, floorboards that whispered tales of those who had walked upon them. Yet the new tenant sensed a presence beyond the usual settling sounds. The footsteps she heard were deliberate, rhythmic, an eerie dance from above. Strangely, she dwelled on the top floor. One night, emboldened by curiosity, she tapped the ceiling with a broomstick. The footsteps ceased abruptly, plunging the space into a thick silence. Then, a single knock echoed back to her from within the very ceiling itself. Sarah Coleman chose to keep the strange occurrence to herself, attributing it to the old building's idiosyncrasies or perhaps a wayward creature exploring the attic. Despite the nightly cadence of footsteps overhead, she adapted, seeking solace in the blaring television, in the solace of headphones, anything to mask the haunting footfalls that traced unseen paths across her ceiling in the shroud of darkness. Detective Morris caught wind of the apartment through an unexpected twist of fate. A maintenance worker during routine repairs stumbled upon a concealed crawl space. The worker, tasked with fixing a leak, removed a section of drywall in the hallway adjacent to Sarah's unit, only to uncover a hidden passage not documented in the building's blueprints. Within this clandestine space, his flashlight revealed a makeshift abode: scattered food wrappers, discarded water bottles, a soiled blanket, and a weathered notebook. The building superintendent wasted no time in alerting the authorities. Detective Morris, accompanied by Detective Rivera, encountered the maintenance worker, visibly shaken and pale. "Someone's been living in the walls," he repeated in a hushed tone. "Someone's been watching." The notebook divulged meticulous observations of Sarah Coleman, her routines, her guests, her meals, her viewing habits. The penmanship, once precise, descended into chaos towards the final pages, with cryptic symbols adorning the margins. "The subject ignores my signals now," the last entry read. "She defies me. No one defies me." Forensic experts scoured the hidden dwelling, unearthing fingerprints that bore no match in any known database. They unearthed a labyrinth of passages woven into the walls and ceilings of the building, some dating back decades as per structural assessments. These passages linked 5 different residences, but terminated at observation points disguised as innocuous fixtures or minor damages, converging solely in Sarah Coleman's abode. Interviews with current occupants yielded no anomalies aside from the usual hum of communal living. However, former tenants painted a divergent picture. 3 previous denizens of Sarah's quarters recounted sensations of being watched or inexplicable noises, prompting one to flee after a mere fortnight. Yet none had dared voice their unease, fearful of being deemed paranoid. The breakthrough transpired when forensic analysis pinpointed minuscule blood spatter within one of the crawlspace hideaways. DNA testing connected the trace to Martin Weaver, a former resident who had vanished mysteriously 4 years prior. Despite his family filing a missing person report, the case had turned frigid. Martin had resided directly below Sarah's unit. Detective Morris revisited Martin's disappearance. Locals recalled Martin's grievances concerning noises emanating from above his domicile. Confronting the occupant upstairs, Edward, a reclusive figure in a confrontation, Martin subsequently vanished. Edward vacated the premises the ensuing month, leaving behind no forwarding address. Scrutinizing Edward's rental history unveiled a pattern. Preferring top-floor abodes, maintaining sparse social ties, and vanishing sans notification characterized his nomadic existence across 6 apartment complexes over 2 decades. A neighbor from his 3rd residence recollected him as intense, gripped by a need for silence. Property records unveiled Edward's ownership of remote rural acreage. Investigative efforts unveiled a cabin adorned with snapshots and notes. Among them, images of residents from various apartments, including Sarah Coleman and Martin Weaver, blueprints of ventilation systems and structural weak spots, detailed logs chronicling specimen observations and habitat preservation. At the cabin's epicenter stood a corkboard festooned with newspaper clippings, missing persons reports 6 in total, all victims of former apartment buildings Edward had inhabited. Beneath the board, scars marred the floorboards, suggesting that a weighty object had been dragged repeatedly. Following the cabin's ominous trail, cadavered dogs led authorities to disturbed earth behind the cabin, unearthing human remains, and then another burial ground, and another. As forensic anthropologists embarked on the somber task of identifying the victims, Detective Morris redirected his focus towards Sarah's residence. Though the crawl spaces had been sealed, residents sporadically reported peculiar sounds. During the installation of enhanced security measures, a peculiar find surfaced: a fresh notebook tucked into a crevice where the ceiling met the wall in the hallway. The notebook's initial page bore a single line: "They found my old nest, but not my new one." The script mirrored the former notebook's contents. The final page depicted a crude diagram of Sarah's apartment layout, with a new passage delineated in crimson, and a date marked for that very night. Officers hastened to evacuate Sarah, only to discover her quarters deserted. Her phone lay inert on the kitchen counter, the television droning on. In the bathroom, steam obscured the mirror, unveiling a cryptic message etched by a finger: "Look up." The ceiling panel above the shower had been pried open. The manhunt for Edward persisted. Identified as Edward Mercer, a former construction expert specializing in renovations, Edward's knowledge of structures facilitated the inception of his covert network of observation posts and conduits. Thermal scans of Sarah's building unveiled no trace of current habitation within the walls. Sarah Coleman's whereabouts remain unknown, her disappearance linked to a string of vanishing acts spanning multiple states. Authorities have cautioned apartment complex managers regarding clandestine modifications and concealed spaces. Yet amid the chilling discoveries of graves and journals, it is the image of Sarah, ensconced in her apartment with phantom footsteps above, that haunts Detective Morris the most. The ceaseless footsteps that responded to her knock and knocked back. In solitary moments ensconced within his abode, Detective Morris finds himself gazing upwards at his ceiling, attuned to the silence, pondering who else may be listening, waiting in the shadows. Story 19: The Enigmatic Dollhouse. She always avoided venturing into the attic, but when a fierce storm caused a leak in the roof, she had no other option. The attic greeted her with a musty scent, filled with forgotten relics hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. Amidst the shadows in the most remote corner rested an ancient dollhouse, exquisitely detailed with miniature furniture meticulously arranged. Yet, as she peered inside, a sense of unease crept over her. The tiny figures within were not typical dolls. They were intricately hand-carved replicas of her own family. Each miniature person mirrored the exact positions of her real family members, except for one stark difference. The figure meant to represent her was not seated, but standing by the attic entrance, watching. Rebecca Morgan tentatively traced her finger along the roof of the dollhouse, feeling the indentation where the tiny wooden figure stood. A shiver ran down her spine, unrelated to the chill wafting through the drafty attic. The presence of the dollhouse was perplexing. This wasn't her childhood home, but a rental property they had recently moved into. The unfolding of events began with Rebecca's frantic call to the authorities. Law enforcement officers arrived at the suburban house to find a family gripped by fear, huddled together in the living room, adamantly refusing to ascend the stairs. Detective Sarah Harmon, the lead investigator, initially brushed off their distress as a possible prank or the product of an unfamiliar environment unsettling their minds. What struck Detective Harmon the most was the astounding level of detail in the dollhouse. Each miniature figurine captured distinct features of the family members: the father's receding hairline, the son's favorite hoodie, even the mother's small birthmark on her hand. The investigation took a chilling turn when forensic analysis revealed fingerprints on the dollhouse that did not match any of the family members. More disconcerting were the microscopic cameras discreetly embedded in the eyes of each miniature figure, all linked to a sophisticated surveillance system concealed beneath the dollhouse itself. Delving into the Morgan family's activities in the days leading up to the discovery unveiled a disturbing revelation. The positions of the figures in the dollhouse not only mirrored the family's recent whereabouts, but also replicated precise moments from different days, indicating a meticulous observer had been studying them extensively. We soon realized this was no ordinary case of stalking, Detective Harmon recounted. The perpetrator exhibited an unparalleled level of fixation rarely encountered in criminal investigations. The discovery of a concealed basement entrance behind a false pantry wall revealed a makeshift living area where evidence suggested someone had been residing for an extended period before the Morgans' arrival. Food remnants, water bottles, and a sleeping bag hinted at a clandestine occupant living beneath the unsuspecting family for weeks. One enigma puzzled investigators: the absence of forced entry. Property records unveiled that the house had sat vacant for nearly a year prior to the Morgans moving in. The previous elderly owners had both passed away within a short span, with their son managing the estate sale and the subsequent rental of the property. Neighbors provided little insight, except for a lone elderly woman who sporadically noticed lights emanating from the house during its unoccupied phase. A breakthrough emerged through digital forensics. Analysis of the surveillance system linked to the miniature cameras led investigators to an external server via an IP address. The trail led to a modest apartment across town where walls were plastered with photographs of the Morgan family and previous occupants of the house. Detailed journal entries chronicled the daily routines of each family member with unsettling accuracy. However, the most chilling discovery awaited in a workshop teeming with half-finished dollhouses, each representing various homes in the vicinity. The apartment belonged to Martin Wells, the son of the deceased homeowners. Financial records indicated mounting debts following his parents' demise. Rather than selling the property outright, he had established a covert living space, continuing to inhabit it while collecting rent from unsuspecting tenants. A forensic psychologist assigned to the case elucidated that the dollhouse served as Wells' control hub, each miniature figure symbolizing someone under his surveillance. The figure of Rebecca positioned by the attic door was not a threat, but rather a subtle acknowledgement of her unmasking of his voyeuristic scheme. During interrogation, Wells maintained an eerie composure as he elucidated his rationale. They were living in my house, sleeping in my parents' room. I needed to ensure they respected it. When pressed about the arranged figures, his response was chillingly simple. I wanted them to know I was always watching. A psychological evaluation unveiled a convoluted narrative of possessive delusion. Unable to cope with the loss of his childhood abode, Wells constructed an elaborate system to retain dominance over the property and its inhabitants. The dollhouse became his conduit to possess both the residents and its dwellers. The Morgan family bid farewell to the house, never to return. Rebecca later confided that her most haunting moment was not discovering the dollhouse but comprehending its implications. We were under constant surveillance, mere pawns in a twisted game. The true horror lay not in the dollhouse itself, but in the realization that to him, we were insignificant playthings, manipulated and observed at will. Wells faced multiple charges encompassing stalking, invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, and breaking and entering. The legal proceedings prompted a reevaluation of real estate disclosure regulations concerning deaths on properties and the obligation of agents to ensure thorough vacating processes before new occupants move in. During sentencing, the judge denounced the egregious violation the Morgan family had endured. You didn't just trespass into their home, you invaded their sanctuary and autonomy. You intruded upon their intimate moments, distorting them for your gratification. Criminologists were perturbed by the case's duration. Had Rebecca not stumbled upon the dollhouse, Wells might have remained undetected for an extended period. Examination of his journals unveiled a clandestine lifestyle spanning nearly 2 years, infiltrating various residences and crafting dollhouses to surveil each family. The Morgan family relocated far away, yet Rebecca confessed in her victim impact statement to persistent unease, habitually checking closets and concealed spaces. She purged their new home of all miniatures, haunted by the lingering sensation of being under scrutiny. Some days I still feel eyes upon me, wondering if somewhere, someone is manipulating a miniature version of myself in a dollhouse yet to be uncovered. Story 20. In the depths of the attic, hidden beneath layers of forgotten possessions, lay an old box. Dust-covered and long neglected, it held secrets waiting to be unveiled. Polaroids, faded and fragile, captured moments of joy and celebration from years past. Birthdays, family gatherings, a glimpse into the lives of strangers. But one photo, the last one, held a chilling mystery. It depicted a familiar living room, the same furniture, the same ambience. Yet the family in the picture was unknown to Rebecca, the current inhabitant of the house. And there, lurking in the shadows, a figure stood in the hallway, a silent observer, a hidden presence. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she gazed at the photograph, a sense of unease creeping over her. Descending the creaking staircase, she felt the weight of the house bearing down on her, the emptiness suffocating. Placing the photo on the kitchen counter, under the harsh glare of the fluorescent light, she saw the undeniable resemblance, the architecture, the decor all mirrored her own home, but with strangers as its occupants. Enter Detective Morgan, a figure shrouded in mystery himself, his weathered leather jacket telling tales of past investigations. With keen eyes, he examined the Polaroid, his touch gentle yet purposeful. Questions lingered in the air as he probed into the history of the house, seeking answers buried deep within its walls. The investigation unfolded quietly, revealing a pattern of disappearances spanning years. Families had come and gone, leaving no trace behind, as if swallowed by the house itself. The Sutherlands, the missing link in this enigma, had left no trail, no hint of their fate. Forensic analysis shed light on the photograph, unraveling its secrets with each detail uncovered. As the truth slowly emerged, a dark past resurfaced. A builder, Samuel Whitfield, once tied to the house's creation, now a specter haunting its halls. His presence, long thought to be a memory, now a living nightmare. The basement, a chamber of horrors, unveiled the grim reality of the missing families, trapped in a time capsule of terror. Rebecca, now a pawn in this twisted game, sought refuge in a world turned upside down. The house, a silent witness to unspeakable acts, stood as a monument to the darkness lurking within. And as the investigation delved deeper, a sinister truth emerged: a hidden chamber in the attic, a journal of madness, a plan unfolding with each passing day. The phone call in the dead of night, the mechanical click of a camera, the chilling realization that the past was not done with her yet. The new families, the new homes, the new watchers, all part of a malevolent design, a cycle repeating through the years. As the house remained sealed, its secrets locked away, the truth lingered in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. Samuel Whitfield, a phantom of the past, a master manipulator, his legacy haunting those who dared to uncover his dark deeds. And so the mystery endures, the house standing silent and empty, a relic of forgotten horrors. The man in the photograph, a specter of the night, his presence felt in every shadow, his gaze following those who seek to unravel the truth. And as the world sleeps, unaware of the darkness that lurks within its walls, the watcher waits, patient and unyielding, for the next chapter to unfold. Story 21. The old Polaroid held secrets within its faded hues, a snapshot frozen in time from a birthday long past. Smiles adorned familiar faces, candles dancing in the soft glow, nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. Yet, as the daughter sifted through the box of forgotten memories left behind by her mother, she noticed it. A presence lurking in the background of every photo, a man cloaked in shadows, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering candlelight. He was not part of the family, not a guest anyone could recall, and yet, with each passing photo, he drew nearer. Sarah Winters stumbled upon the collection while clearing out the attic after her mother's funeral. The cardboard box, simply labeled Memories, held a treasure trove of moments captured in time, a chronicle of happier days gone by. but what should have brought solace instead sparked a chilling realization. In the initial photo, he was a mere silhouette on the periphery, a mysterious figure lingering at the edge during her 7th birthday celebration. In the next snapshot, he had crept closer, now inside the room. By the 3rd photo, he loomed behind her uncle, unnoticed by all captured in the frame. Disturbed, Sarah reached out to her father, her voice quivering as she questioned him about the stranger haunting the family photos. "Dad, who is this man in the background of these pictures?" she asked, desperation seeping into her tone. A heavy silence hung between them before her father finally responded, his voice tinged with unease. "What man? There shouldn't be anyone there but family." Determined to unravel the mystery, Sarah took digital images of the Polaroids and sent them to her father. His subsequent call revealed a deep sense of disbelief as he struggled to comprehend the inexplicable figure in the photographs. A local detective, Marcus Reed, was brought into the fold, his seasoned gaze taking in the eerie progression of the shadowy man through the captured moments. As rain tapped against the windows of the precinct, Sarah laid out the photos before Detective Reed, each image telling a silent tale of the intruder's insidious advance. The detective, his hands weathered with experience, studied the sequence intently, a sense of intrigue flickering in his eyes. The gradual movement of the figure towards the children in the final photo sent a shiver down his spine. Suggesting the photographer as a possible explanation, Reed's doubt lingered in the air. However, Sarah's revelation that her mother had been the one behind the camera, setting the timer and stepping into each frame, left them grasping at straws. The investigation took a grave turn as Reed delved deeper, reaching out to every surviving attendee of the party depicted in the haunting photographs. No recollection surfaced, no memory of the mysterious man who seemed to move undetected through the gatherings. The remote location of the property, carefully chosen for privacy, added another layer of complexity to the enigma. Facial recognition software proved futile against the obscured figure, his deliberate avoidance of the camera's lens hinting at a chilling awareness. Just as the investigation seemed to reach a standstill, Sarah unearthed more photos from different family albums, each showing the same shadowy figure lurking in the background, unnoticed and unseen. With the help of a computer specialist, hidden details emerged from the aged photographs, shedding light on the enigmatic presence. A breakthrough came with the discovery of dental records linking the figure to Robert Keller, a maintenance worker with a dark past tied to unsolved child abductions spanning decades. Keller's connection to the vacation property where Sarah's birthday had taken place raised chilling questions about his hidden presence in countless family gatherings. Authorities, spurred into action, unearthed grim evidence buried beneath the foundation of Keller's former residence, remnants of lives disrupted, of children taken. The closure brought a bittersweet relief to families long haunted by unanswered questions, though the truth they sought was a harsh reality to bear. Alone in her apartment, surrounded by the chilling evidence that had unraveled a web of concealed horrors, Sarah received a call from Detective Reed. The news of identified remains near one of the vacation properties sent a shiver down her spine. DNA had confirmed the identity of one of the missing children, bringing a sense of closure tinged with sorrow. Gazing at the final birthday photo, the warmth of the candlelight on her family's faces juxtaposed with the sinister presence lingering behind her younger self, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The figure, invisible to all but the lens of the camera, had been a harbinger of tragedy, a specter haunting their celebrations. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, decades-old cases found resolution, connecting a trail of disappearances to the shadow in the family photos. Justice, long overdue, had finally caught up to the hidden figure who had moved unseen through the frozen moments of time, leaving behind a legacy of fear and loss. Gently placing the photos back into the box, Sarah knew they were more than mere memories now. They were a testament to the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows, the unseen threats that moved through life's celebrations undetected, leaving behind only faint traces of their malevolent presence. Story 22. The worn envelope, aged and yellowed, bore a fresh stamp, its journey ending just days before. With cautious hands, the detective unfolded the creased paper within. Typed in haste, the message read, "I am sorry for what I did." A dampness clung to the paper, carrying a faint scent of iron. A reddish smear along the edge caught their attention, not ink but human blood. Detective Sarah Morgan, skilled and precise, secured the letter in an evidence bag, the touch of her gloved fingers deliberate. The forensics team confirmed her suspicion. The blood matched the DNA from a long unsolved case, that of Rebecca Warren, a young journalist found brutally slain in her home. The case had haunted the department, her murder unresolved despite exhaustive efforts. Now, a mysterious letter had arrived at the homicide division, bearing a cryptic message and a chilling connection to the past. The letter, devoid of fingerprints save for faint smudges, hinted at a careful sender. The postmark, a beacon of hope in a sea of dead ends, spurred Detective Morgan to action. Gathering her team in the dimly lit briefing room, she pinned the letter at the heart of the investigation board. "This changes everything," she intoned, her voice a whisper in the quiet space. "Our killer shows remorse." Detective James Chen, a steadfast partner in the pursuit of justice, studied the letter thoughtfully. "Or perhaps they seek to deceive," he suggested. "The blood, a macabre touch to toy with us." The hunt for the typewriter began, its unique patterns leading the team down a path of antiquity. As they delved into Rebecca's life, a portrait emerged of a determined journalist unearthing secrets that some would kill to protect. Her latest inquiry into a wealthy and influential family had uncovered a web of deceit and betrayal. Interviews with Rebecca's loved ones uncovered whispers of a shadowy figure trailing her steps. Michael Barnes, her once devastated boyfriend, now bore the weight of suspicion. His demeanor shifted subtly under the team's scrutiny, betraying a hidden truth. She feared someone was watching, he confessed, eyes haunted by the past. "I should have listened." A second letter arrived, mirroring the first in its unsettling contents. The confession within hinted at a chilling truth. The family Rebecca had investigated held dark secrets, secrets worth killing for. The trail led to the opulent mansion of the family patriarch, now deceased under suspicious circumstances. Richard, the eldest son, faced intense scrutiny as his veneer of composure cracked under interrogation. A breakthrough came with the discovery of fibers on the envelopes, linking them to the youngest daughter, Eleanor. Her revelation of Richard's request for stationery unraveled a tapestry of deceit. A hidden room in Richard's estate unveiled a trove of damning evidence clippings, surveillance, and a vintage typewriter stained with Rebecca's blood. The tangled web extended further as financial transactions revealed a sinister alliance between Richard and Michael. The truth emerged in shards of shattered trust: Richard's desperate bid for power, Michael's fatal betrayal of a lover's trust. Eleanor's recording, a damning testament to treachery, sealed Richard's fate. In the hush of the courtroom, justice unfolded. Richard's protestations of innocence crumbled beneath the weight of evidence, his guilt etched in every word and deed. The jury's swift verdict echoed the finality of justice served. As Richard faced his reckoning, Detective Morgan approached Rebecca's grieving parents, offering solace in a moment of closure. The blood-stained letters, relics of a twisted tale, found their rest in evidence storage, a reminder that even the most carefully woven lies unravel under the weight of truth. Rebecca's legacy endured, a cautionary tale for generations of detectives to come. In the quiet of night, as the world slept, the old typewriter whispered its secrets, a lullaby of justice served and the shadows of guilt laid bare. Story 23. The parcel lacked a return address, devoid of any tracking information, just a plain cardboard box bearing the faint moisture of morning dew. It wasn't intended for her. The address was correct, yet the name was a stranger's. She should have dismissed it, left it untouched on the doorstep, but curiosity tugged at her, urging her to unravel the mystery. With hesitant hands, she tore open the tape, anticipating mundane contents like books or clothing. However, nestled inside was a VHS tape, accompanied by a solitary sticky note that simply read, "Watch alone." Sarah Miller held the obsidian plastic cassette in her hands, sensing an unusual weight to it, as if burdened with the gravity of forbidden secrets. Tracing her fingers along the worn edges, she felt the imperfections in the plastic casing. The handwritten note bore the imprints of urgency, each stroke etched with determination. The backdrop of her suburban neighborhood hummed with its usual rhythms: a distant dog's bark, children's laughter, the drone of a lawnmower. Oblivious to the enigma that had just been delivered to her doorstep, Sarah brought the package inside, placing it on her kitchen counter as doubt crept into her mind. The name Daniel Whitaker held no significance to her. Having resided in the house for nearly 4 years, she had never received mail addressed to that name. Former occupants, the Johnsons, had long departed, leaving behind no trace of a Daniel Whitaker. Curiosity wrestled with unease as she eyed her outdated VCR, a relic of nostalgic sentiment. There was something about the tape that beckoned to her, a mystery shrouded in worn plastic. Against her better judgment, Sarah inserted the tape into the machine. Initially, static flickered on the screen, gradually sharpening into focus. A dimly lit room materialized, illuminated by a single lamp. The camera angle was askew, casting an eerie ambience. A man sat in a wooden chair, his features initially obscured by shadows. "My name is Daniel Whitaker," his voice resonated quietly but resolutely. "If you're watching this, someone has found you, and that means they will find me too." Leaning forward, he revealed a countenance marked by sleepless nights and perpetual watchfulness, sunken eyes, stubble, disheveled hair. "I am not a killer. I need you to understand that. But they have framed me, planted evidence, my fingerprints, my DNA, despite never laying a hand on her." The camera trembled as Daniel adjusted it, unveiling more of the sparse room, a stark environment, devoid of comfort, indicative of someone prepared to flee at a moment's notice. "They have fabricated everything. The police report will claim I knew her, that we quarreled, that witnesses heard us in altercation. None of it is true. I only saw Catherine Walsh's face when it flashed on the news." His voice wavered slightly. "Deceased, murdered in her own home. And yet my DNA was inexplicably present at the crime scene." Detective Eliza Ramirez scrutinized the identical VHS tape resting on her desk, the fifth one to emerge. 5 tapes, 5 disparate recipients, each receiving the same desperate plea from Daniel Whitaker, a man officially accused in the murder of Catherine Walsh. A man who had vanished without a trace upon the discovery of her lifeless body. Initially, the Walsh case appeared clear-cut: a young professional woman strangled in her bedroom, no signs of forced entry, indications of a struggle. DNA evidence unequivocally pointing to Whitaker, his fingerprints already on file from a prior minor offense. Eyewitnesses attesting to his presence near her residence in the days leading up to the tragedy. A seamless case. yet the arrival of the tapes complicated matters. The tapes introduced complexity. Detective Ramirez articulated into her recorder, updating the case files. Whitaker is either orchestrating an elaborate diversion or exposing a darker truth. Surveying her evidence board, she lingered on photographs of Catherine Walsh exuding vitality, crime scene images too unsettling to dwell on, maps pinpointing the delivery locations of the enigmatic packages, and at the center, Daniel Whitaker's driver's license photo, his eyes imploring. The investigation took an unforeseen turn when Ramirez unearthed Catherine Walsh's involvement in a whistleblower case against her employer, Pharmacorp, a formidable pharmaceutical entity with governmental ties. Walsh had stumbled upon irregularities in their clinical trial data, revealing a cover-up of severe side effects in a new drug fast-track for market release. She was gearing up to testify. A former colleague divulged to Ramirez in hushed tones, casting furtive glances toward the exit. Catherine possessed damning evidence, documents proving that executives were aware of the issues and chose to bury them. The trial was imminent. Detectives Ramirez began noticing peculiar incongruities. The DNA evidence appeared too pristine, discovering traces in illogical locations within the crime scene. Witness statements regarding Whitaker seemed rehearsed, echoing identical phrases across varying testimonies. Most disconcerting, surveillance footage from neighboring establishments mysteriously corrupted during the precise time frame encompassing the murder. 3 days subsequent to the tape's delivery, Sarah Miller received a second package. This one housed an array of documents, clinical trial reports, internal communications, email transcripts, all originating from Pharmacorp and bearing Catherine Walsh's digital signature. Each document substantiated her claims. Detective Ramirez pivoted the investigation, collaborating with other tape recipients to unravel Whitaker's trail of breadcrumbs. Employed in IT security for a contractor servicing Pharmacorp systems, Whitaker had never crossed paths with Catherine, yet he had stumbled upon her name flagged within an unconventional security protocol he wasn't authorized to access. They were monitoring her, Whitaker elucidated in a subsequent tape that surfaced. I intercepted the surveillance directives within the system. They knew she was amassing evidence. Soon after, I found myself locked out of the network. The subsequent day, she was deceased, and inexplicably, I was branded the perpetrator. The breakthrough in the case arose when Sarah Miller discerned a crucial detail on her tape. A reflection within a window behind Whitaker revealed a row of storage units. Collaborating with Detective Ramirez, they pinpointed the location. Hidden within Unit 217, they uncovered a trove of evidence: Whitaker's journal chronicling the conspiracy, Catherine's original files, and most damningly detailed strategies concocted to frame Whitaker. Inscribed in the handwriting of Pharmacorp's head of security, a former law enforcement officer with access to evidence handling procedures. Justice was delivered not through dramatic arrests, but via the accrual of incontrovertible evidence. 3 executives faced indictments. The head of security confessed, securing a deal to testify against his superiors. The contentious drug was withdrawn from consideration. Emerging from seclusion, Daniel Whitaker appeared emaciated, altered by his fugitive ordeal. Though his charges were dismissed, the experience had etched its mark upon him. Sarah Miller encountered him once more as he arrived to reclaim his tape. A brief exchange unfolded on her porch, the very spot where his saga had commenced. "Why me?" she inquired. "Why send it to my address?" He regarded her with weary eyes. "The algorithm selected you. I required individuals unconnected to me or Catherine, individuals off their radar. Individuals who might retain faith in their own discernment amidst the prevailing narrative of my culpability." The erstwhile suspect and the inadvertent witness stood in silent contemplation, pondering the tenuous boundary between justice and manufactured reality. Finally, Sarah interjected. The erroneous address turned out to be precisely the correct one. The VHS tapes were cataloged as evidence, tangible reminders that truth sometimes arrives in unanticipated parcels, bearing unfamiliar names, awaiting a curious soul to delve within. Story 24. In the dead of night, a faint flicker danced across the baby monitor screen, a fleeting anomaly that caught the mother's attention only for a moment. Dismissing it as a glitch, she turned back to her book, seeking solace in the routine of the evening. But then, as if defying logic, the audio crackled to life, a static-laden whisper cutting through the silence. SHHH, go back to sleep. A chill crept down her spine, her instincts on high alert as her blood ran cold. With a heart hammering in her chest, she rushed to her son's room, each step a thunderous echo in the stillness of the house. The sight that greeted her tore at her very being. The crib stood empty, a void where her precious Samuel should have been. The window remained tightly shut, the door securely locked. The only disturbance in the room was the abandoned stuffed rabbit, its once innocent gaze now hauntingly fixed upon her, as if bearing witness to the unseen. In the aftermath, Rebecca's screams pierced the night, a raw, guttural sound that carried her terror beyond the confines of her home. The neighbors, stirred from their slumber by her anguished cries, acted swiftly, summoning help in the form of emergency services. When the authorities arrived, they found Rebecca cradling the forsaken rabbit, her world shattered, lost in a realm of unfathomable grief. As the investigation unfolded, a shroud of mystery enveloped the disappearance of little Samuel. The absence of clues confounded the authorities. No signs of forced entry, no alarms breached, no trace of the intruder save for the chilling voice that had penetrated the sanctity of the nursery. Suspicion, like a shadow, fell upon Rebecca, her past struggles with postpartum depression casting a dubious light on her maternal innocence. Just when the darkness seemed impenetrable, a glimmer of hope emerged. Forensic analysis unearthed microscopic fibers on the nursery windowsill, foreign threads hinting at an intruder's clandestine entry. The focus shifted, revealing a narrative woven in shadows and secrets. Security footage whispered of a cloaked figure, a phantom in the night, leaving behind only whispers of their sinister presence. In a twist of fate, Daniel, the absent husband, returned to a house haunted by questions. His demeanor, once stoic, now betrayed by the telltale marks of a hidden life. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place: rock climbing, a newfound hobby, a second family lurking in the shadows, a web of deceit spun from desperation and greed. With each revelation, the baby monitor emerged as a silent witness to treachery. Its hacked signals unveiled a chilling truth that the voice, the whispers in the night, had been a facade orchestrated from afar, a cruel ruse to deceive and betray. The unraveling of the mystery led the investigators to a chilling discovery: a basement harboring a fragile truth. There, amidst the shadows, Samuel was found, tended to by a spectral figure named Elaine, a ghost from Daniel's past seeking solace in stolen moments. The trial that followed echoed with the weight of betrayal. Forensic evidence painted a damning portrait, exposing the tangled web of deceit that had ensnared an innocent child. The hushed whispers of the baby monitor, once a harbinger of fear, now echoed with the truth that shattered lives and forged new beginnings. As justice was served, Rebecca and Samuel embarked on a journey of healing, leaving behind the echoes of a nightmarish past. The stuffed rabbit, a silent sentinel of the truth, remained locked away, a reminder of the darkness that once gripped their lives. In the quiet moments of the night, as the world drifted into slumber, the whispers of the baby monitor lingered, a cautionary tale of how shadows can cloak the most heinous of deeds, and how even in the darkness, the light of truth will always find a way to shine through. Story 25. In the heart of the city, there stood a quaint coffee shop, a sanctuary of solitude and routine for a mysterious man known only as John Doe. Every day, without fail, he would enter the shop, order his black coffee, and retreat to his secluded corner table, hidden behind a verdant plant. His presence was as unobtrusive as the morning mist, his interactions minimal, his essence a whisper in the bustling cafe. The barista recognized his face, the regulars acknowledged his presence, yet no one delved beneath the surface to unravel the enigma of his identity. John Doe existed on the periphery of awareness, a ghostly figure in the daily rhythm of the coffee shop. Then one fateful day, the routine shattered like delicate porcelain. John Doe failed to make his customary appearance, leaving behind a solitary wallet on the table, a silent testament to his abrupt disappearance. Detective Sarah Mercer was called to investigate the peculiar case, her keen eyes searching for answers in the void left by the elusive man. As Mercer delved deeper into the mystery, she uncovered a trail of perplexing clues that defied logic and reason. The security footage revealed a startling truth. John Doe had entered the coffee shop, had taken his seat, and had vanished into the ether, leaving behind nothing but questions and a sense of disquiet. The wallet, a vessel of emptiness, held no tangible clues to his identity, only a haunting photograph and a void where his name should have been. The contents within, a cryptic puzzle of blank spaces and elusive numbers, offered no solace to the perplexed detective. In her pursuit of the elusive truth, Mercer encountered a labyrinth of secrets woven into the fabric of reality itself. A journal filled with arcane symbols and incomprehensible scripts, sketches of otherworldly buildings, and references to temporal anomalies hinted at a realm beyond comprehension. The mirror, an ancient artifact steeped in mystery, became the focal point of Mercer's investigation. Its ornate frame whispered of forgotten truths, its glass a portal to realms unseen. Behind its reflective surface, a hidden chamber revealed a trove of identical wallets, each a vessel of lost identities, each a fragment of a shattered reality. As Mercer grappled with the enigma of John Doe, a former physicist emerged from the shadows of the past, shedding light on the darkness that enveloped the case. Daniel Weston, a brilliant mind lost to the annals of time, had traversed the boundaries of existence in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The coffee shop, a nexus of converging realities, stood as a testament to Weston's experiments in temporal displacement and identity transference. His disappearance, a ripple in the fabric of space and time, echoed through the corridors of history, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and fractured truths. In the final moments of the investigation, Mercer stood at the threshold of revelation, gazing into the shattered mirror that bridged worlds. There, amidst the shards of glass and echoes of forgotten whispers, she glimpsed the elusive truth, two versions of the same man, existing in parallel, bound by the threads of fate. And as the mirror shattered, as reality fractured and merged, Mercer was left with a single, haunting message, a warning from beyond the veil of existence. The experiment was complete, the window closed, the boundaries sealed. The case of the man who didn't exist remains a mystery shrouded in the mists of time, a tale whispered in the quiet corners of the city. The coffee shop, a silent witness to the unraveling of realities, closed its doors, its secrets buried beneath the rubble of forgotten dreams. Yet in the stillness of the night, a lone figure sits on a porch, pen in hand, writing furiously in a notebook that mirrors the musings of a lost physicist. Detective Mercer, haunted by the echoes of a world beyond, finds solace in the fragments of a shattered mirror, its surface a reflection of the mysteries that lie dormant in the shadows of existence. Story 26. Renovations always unveil peculiar things: old newspapers, shattered trinkets, forgotten photographs. But when the couple pried up the floorboards, they stumbled upon a letter neatly folded beneath the wood. The paper was fragile, the ink worn, yet the message lingered clearly: "Don't trust the one who knocked." Before they could react, 3 sharp knocks reverberated through the hollow house. The discovery sent shivers down their spines. Sarah and Michael had acquired the Victorian-era home at an estate auction, captivated by its intricate moldings and storied past. Little did they anticipate that their renovation endeavor would unearth something so disquieting. Detective Alina Reed arrived with her partner, the floorboards still upturned, revealing the shadowy void below. Her weathered hands, etched by years of handling evidence, delicately retrieved the note with gloved fingers. The couple had already touched its inevitable contamination. Reed scrutinized their expressions as they recounted the knocking sound. Their fear appeared genuine. Background checks uncovered nothing dubious about Sarah and Michael. Newlyweds, solid credit, steady jobs. However, the house harbored a more intricate history. Formerly owned by the Hargrove family for generations, it had stood empty for 2 years following the passing of the final resident, Margaret Hargrove, an elderly widow who lived in solitude. Neighbors described Margaret as reclusive yet amiable. No known foes, no suspicious circumstances surrounding her demise, natural causes, as per the coroner, yet something felt awry. Forensic analysis dated the note to around 2 decades earlier. The handwriting displayed signs of distress pressure points indicating fear or urgency. Margaret would have been in her 60s then, residing with her husband, Franklin, who had departed 5 years before her. Reed delved deeper into her investigation, sifting through county records and interviewing former acquaintances of the Hargroves. Franklin had been esteemed in the community, a retired teacher with a passion for woodworking. Several of his handcrafted pieces still adorn the house. A former student of Franklin's recollected him as kind yet troubled in his final teaching years. He grew paranoid, the student reminisced, kept talking about someone watching him. We all assumed it was early dementia. The breakthrough emerged during Reed's conversation with Margaret's sister, now residing in a nursing home. Her memory faded in and out, but certain details remained vivid. Margaret feared him toward the end, she whispered. Not Franklin, no, the man who knocked, the collector. Reed leaned in. The collector. Franklin owed money, gambling debts. The man would knock 3 times, always 3 knocks. Margaret wanted to sell the house to settle the debt, but Franklin refused. Reed returned to the house, this time accompanied by a forensic team. They removed more floorboards, methodically scouring the crawl space. The cadaver dogs made the discovery first beneath the foundation, wrapped in plastic. A male skeleton, skull fractured in numerous places. Dental records confirmed it wasn't Franklin Hargrove. Franklin had been cremated, his ashes scattered per his wishes. This was someone else, someone never reported missing. Further excavation unveiled more a wallet preserved within the plastic. The ID inside belonged to Victor Mercer, known to law enforcement as a loan shark and collector for an illicit gambling ring. He had vanished 2 decades ago without a trace. The case unraveled through forensic evidence and Margaret's diaries unearthed from the attic. Franklin had amassed significant gambling debts. When Mercer came to collect, making threats against Margaret, Franklin snapped. Workshop tools turned into weapons. The crawl space transformed into a tomb. The note evolved into a forewarning. Margaret had aided in the cover-up, not out of malice, but out of fear and loyalty. Her diaries unveiled the anguish she endured afterward. I hear the knocking at times, even when no one's there. 3 knocks, always 3. Franklin claims it's my imagination. After Franklin succumbed to a heart attack, Margaret lived alone in the house, never remarried, never relocated, harboring the secret beneath her feet. Her diary entries spiraled into paranoia. The knocking persists. I dread someone knows. The case concluded officially. The remains of Victor Mercer were returned to his surviving family. Justice, cold and belated, had been served at last. Sarah and Michael sold the house, unable to coexist with its history. It sits vacant, the renovations abandoned. Local whispers suggest that occasionally in the still of night, 3 distinct knocks resound through the vacant corridors. Whether it's the creaking of aged timber or something more sinister remains a mystery. The note remains in evidence storage, its message a chilling reminder. Don't trust the one who knocked. Margaret never specified whether she meant Mercer, Franklin, or perhaps another entirely, someone who had unearthed their secret and wielded it to torment her in her final years. Some enigmas, Detective Reed noted in her final report, are never wholly unraveled, even when we believe we've uncovered the truth. Story 27. The tale begins in a quaint costume shop that was on the verge of closing its doors, offering up its old treasures to anyone willing to take a piece of its history home. Amidst the remnants of forgotten characters and discarded disguises, a woman ventured in and discovered a mask perched on a dusty shelf. Its delicate features held a mysterious allure, yet there was something unsettlingly lifelike about it that gave her pause. The cashier, eyeing the mask warily, hesitated when she placed it on the counter, muttering under his breath, "That's not ours." Confusion clouded her thoughts as she checked for a tag, only to find none in sight. With a nonchalant shrug, she decided to claim the mask as her own and carried it away to her abode. As the night draped its velvety cloak over the world, a soft sound stirred the woman, Catherine Reed, from her slumber. The gentle whisper of fabric shifting beckoned her awake. Her heart quickened as she realized the mask was no longer resting on the dresser where she had left it. Instead, it sat ominously on her nightstand, its gaze fixed upon her with an eerie intensity. Days turned into weeks, and then one fateful morning, Catherine's neighbor stumbled upon a chilling scene. The front door of her home stood ajar, allowing a sliver of morning light to spill into the darkness within. What awaited inside would haunt the investigators for years to come. Catherine's lifeless form lay sprawled on the bedroom floor, the mask nowhere to be found. Detective Morgan arrived at the scene as forensics meticulously documented every detail. The rhythmic click of the shutters provided a haunting accompaniment to the hushed voices of the investigators. "No signs of forced entry," noted one officer, his pen scratching against the notepad. The detective, with a keen eye for the subtlest of clues, observed the room with a sense of quiet intensity. A partially open drawer, a lipstick-stained water glass on the nightstand. Everything appeared ordinary except for the tragic figure that now lay before them. The medical examiner, his expression grave, bent over Catherine's body, seeking answers in the stillness of death. Cause of death unclear at first glance. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle, he remarked, gesturing towards her face frozen in a mask of terror. Leaning in closer, the detective whispered, "Something scared her to death." Catherine was known in her circle as a meticulous art appraiser, renowned for her ability to discern authenticity with a single glance. Her colleagues spoke of her keen eye for detail, her unwavering dedication to her craft. Could it be that this very talent had led her down a path of unforeseen peril? The investigation took a curious turn when security footage from the costume shop revealed a puzzling interaction. The cashier's bewilderment at the sight of the mask was palpable, prompting him to seek the owner's counsel. A conversation ensued, during which the owner vehemently denied any knowledge of the mysterious mask. A visit to the now vacant costume shop shed light on the mask's origins or lack thereof. The owner, his hands trembling with unease, confessed that the mask had materialized during a clearance sale, its origins shrouded in mystery. "It wasn't part of our inventory," he admitted, his voice tinged with apprehension. He spoke of strange occurrences following the acquisition of items from a collector's estate sale, hinting at a dark history tied to the enigmatic mask. A breakthrough emerged when forensic analysis uncovered peculiar fibers embedded in Catherine's fingertips. She was grasping at something, the lab technician explained, noting the fiber's unusual composition, a blend of human hair and an unidentified organic substance defying categorization. The trail of evidence led to a series of similar deaths spanning decades, all linked by the acquisition of peculiar masks and the victims' faces etched in terror. A retired detective, a veteran of one such case, shared a revelation that sent shivers down the current investigator's spine. In a dimly lit room, he disclosed a hidden truth found within each mask, an ancient script hinting at a ritual of soul transference. The pieces of the puzzle began to align, weaving a tapestry of dread and mystique. A journal discovered in Catherine's apartment unveiled a harrowing account of her final days. Her words painted a portrait of mounting fear, of a malevolent presence lurking in the shadows. She chronicled her descent into madness as she delved into the mask's sinister past, connecting it to a lineage of tragic deaths. "The mask moves," her frantic scrawl declared, unveiling a chilling truth that defied rational explanation. With each revelation, the investigation delved deeper into the realm of the supernatural, grappling with forces beyond comprehension. The cause of Catherine's demise was finally unveiled, a fatal heart stoppage induced by unfathomable terror. What unseen horror could prompt such a catastrophic end? Surveillance footage from a vigilant neighbor's home unveiled a disturbing sight, the silhouette of a figure exiting Catherine's residence, cloaked in the mask's eerie visage. The entity moved with her gait, yet something was amiss, a mechanical quality that hinted at a sinister truth. A race against time ensued to locate the elusive mask, but its trail vanished into the ether, only to resurface months later in a distant vintage shop. As the tendrils of mystery tightened their grip, the mask found a new owner, slipping through the cracks of official records and into obscurity once more. The investigation yielded no definitive answers, leaving the detective to ponder the chilling legacy of the mask. Catherine's journal, a testament to the inexplicable horrors she faced, now rested in the detective's drawer, a stark reminder of the darkness that lurked beyond the veil of reality. In the stillness of night, a sense of unease lingered, a whisper of something otherworldly brushing against the edges of perception. The detective, haunted by the specter of the mask's malevolence, sought solace in the mundane rituals of securing windows and doors, warding off the encroaching darkness. For the mask, with its empty gaze and insatiable hunger, awaited its next unwitting victim, perpetuating a cycle of terror that spanned centuries, a vessel for ancient evils seeking to claim what lay hidden behind mortal eyes.